The city of Wellington, located in the state of Ohio, is small, with a population of about 5,000 residents. It is known as a quiet and peaceful place, ideal for people seeking privacy, wanting to raise children, or simply starting anew. There are practically no attractions here, except for the picturesque landscapes. Life flows as deliberately as possible, which is, of course, beneficial for the older generation who have chosen to move away from the hustle of the city. However, young people often find little to do. As they grow up, they typically leave the parental nest to go to larger cities for education, to build careers, and to start their own lives. Subsequently, this cycle tends to repeat itself. In Wellington lived the Petrick family, Susan Petrick, her husband Mark Petrick, their two daughters, Heidi and Holly, their youngest son, Daniel. They had been married for about 23 years. Susan was born and raised in a similar town in the state of Maryland. From an early age, she dreamed of having a family but understood that she first needed to work hard to establish herself. Therefore, she studied diligently in college in Pennsylvania, where she met Mark. The two fell in love at first sight and have been inseparable since. After finishing their studies, they moved to Wellington. Upon completing her education, Susan became a nurse, a goal she had long aspired to achieve. After relocating, she quickly found a job at the Wellington Medical Center. Mark became a church minister and was appointed pastor of a local church, earning great respect throughout the area. They raised their children in a Christian environment where faith was prioritized. From a young age, their daughter, son were surrounded by love and care. At the time of these events, Daniel was just entering adolescence, which significantly impacted his relationships with loved ones. Born on August 24, 1991, he was described by family and friends as an ordinary, sociable, friendly, and welcoming teenager. Biblical scriptures were meaningful to him, thanks to the general traditions upheld in the Petrick family. He was considered an average student, neither excelling nor standing out, but was certainly no worse than his peers. He always steered clear of conflicts and was not the type to cause trouble. Even Daniel's rebellious phase was calmer than for many teenagers. He had good academic performance and big plans for the future that seemed attainable. Considering life in a small American town, where teenagers might find it boring, Daniel quickly found entertainment in computer games. After transitioning to high school, he developed a keen interest in sports and led an active lifestyle, so his new gaming passion did not raise any red flags at first. However, he became overly engrossed in them. At the age of 16, Daniel sustained a spinal injury one winter while skiing with his parents, which left him bedridden for significant stretches of time. During this period, he spent his time either watching TV or playing video games, leading to a serious addiction that developed almost by accident. Mark, his father, began to notice the high level of violence depicted in the games Daniel was playing and worried about the potential negative influence on him. By 2007, Mark had convinced himself that such games were detrimental to the younger generation, noticing Daniel's growing dependency on them. Daniel dedicated all his free time to his new passion and became anxious if he was unable to play. By that time, the gaming industry had not yet developed to the point where parents treated it with understanding. Concerns varied widely. Daniel's relatives viewed video games as evil, and Mark felt compelled to protect his son from them. Mark and Susan took total control of Daniel's entertainment, scrutinized every video game he wanted to play. As a rule, they rejected many of them due to their violence and graphic nature. For example, Daniel was prohibited from playing GTA, which he had started playing at 15. Consequently, he was forced to visit friends to secretly play games he enjoyed. In 2007, a new game called Halo 3 was gaining popularity, capturing Daniel's interest along with a group of friends. Upon its release, it quickly rose to the top of the charts. Unsurprisingly, Daniel didn't want to be left behind by his friends in the gaming world. This prompted his family to check the game, which led to their discontent. Daniel considered the level of cruelty between the parents and him excessive. The real confrontation began when Mark rejected Daniel's previous choice of game, forbidding him from playing it in their home. Once again, Daniel was forced to go to his friend's house to play. However, Mark accidentally found out what his son were doing and wanted to take control of these visits, which created more pressure on Daniel. The more resistance he encountered, the more tension built within the Petrick family. By October 2007, Daniel could not resist his craving for games despite the bans. One day, he turned to his father and asked to buy a disc so that he could have fun. His religious father refused, using the same pretext that it was too cruel and bloody a game that could harm his psyche. The dialogue escalated into a conflict. By this point, Daniel was playing at least 8 hours a day, which became one of the reasons for disagreements with the older generation. Mark, seeing his son's inappropriate behavior, once again lost his temper and issued an ultimatum, telling Daniel that he would have to move out if he did not give up playing. Daniel chose the first option and moved in with a friend for a few days. Initially, this new life felt like paradise to Daniel, but it did not last long. The teenagers played until 6 p.m., and his friend's parents grew worried, asking him to play less. They even suggested Daniel return home due to the potential disturbance to their family, as they believed Daniel had provoked their son's endless gaming. Daniel returned home, but this did not resolve the ongoing tension within the family. Mark continued to insist that they should give up video games, particularly this one. However, Daniel had no intention of listening. Soon after returning to his parents' house, he stole money, secretly escaped through the window, and bought a disc of the game Halo 3, which his father had forbidden. Daniel knew this action could cause problems but hoped he could play secretly. Naturally, Daniel was quickly caught, which was the last straw for Mark. He confiscated the game console and locked it in the family safe, keeping it in the same place as his gun and ammunition, which he had acquired long ago for self-defense in case of a robbery. The key was kept in a secret place that Daniel did not know about. In light of all this, Daniel began to exhibit real fits of hysteria. Mark expected to resolve these problems in the coming days. The situation concerning Daniel's gaming addiction had clearly gotten out of control. As a result, Mark began to consult and search for a specialist who could help with his son's addiction. Saturday, October 20th, 2007, was an ordinary day for the Petrick family. The long-awaited weekend had arrived. The family planned to go to the supermarket for shopping and then to a cafe. Mark and Susan thought this would help re-establish contact with their son. They tried to enjoy their vacation. Their eldest daughter, Heidi, was spending time with friends and her husband, promising to return home with them in the evening. The youngest daughter was studying at the university and lived separately. After dinner, Daniel's parents were sitting in the living room watching TV when he unexpectedly entered the room and stood in front of them. He appeared very excited, claimed he had a gift for them, asking them to close their eyes. In the last few days, Daniel had not communicated with them at all, so his behavior and the idea of a gift genuinely surprised Mark and Susan. They decided to play along, closed their eyes. A few seconds of anticipation passed when Mark suddenly heard a familiar metallic click. It turned out that Daniel had spent the last few days desperately trying to find the key to his father's safe, which would allow him to retrieve his favorite game. When he finally managed to do so, he discovered something even more alarming. Right in front of him lay a pistol with cartridges. Hearing that familiar metallic sound, Mark opened his eyes only to witness his wife being shot. He couldn't believe his son could do something like that. Then another shot rang out. Mark was attacked in the back of the head. Mark didn't have time to react to the noise. He was attacked immediately as his son stood behind his. Mark fell to the floor. His head went numb and he saw blood pouring from his skull. Susan had died from gunshot wounds to the head, arm, and chest. Daniel then placed the gun in his father's hand to make it look like a murder-suicide, telling him, "Hey, Dad, this is your gun. Take it." A few minutes later, Daniel's older sister, Heidi, returned home with her husband. Heidi knocked on the door, and Daniel opened it, but he looked strange, standing in the hallway and not letting anyone in. Heidi tried to understand what was wrong with Daniel. He responded that there was a conflict with their parents and that it would be better for them to leave the house to give him time to make amends. Heidi called her parents, but received no answer. Then she tried to enter the house past her brother, but he grabbed the door, began to show noticeable anger. The bullet had gotten lodged in his skull, miraculously not causing fatal injuries. While Heidi tried to find out from Daniel why he didn't want to let her into their parents' house, a sound echoed behind him. Gathering all his strength, Mark called for help. Heidi pushed her brother aside and looked into the living room, where she saw the horrifying scene. Their mother had been attacked and lay in a pool of blood, with no signs of life. Their father remained sitting on the couch, his face contorted in pain, with blood splattered across the furniture, floors, and walls. Realizing he was exposed, Daniel pulled out his father's pistol from his bosom and stepped toward Heidi. Fortunately, her husband managed to react in time, taking the weapons away from Daniel, who then decided to run away. Surprisingly, even after all these events, Daniel left his parents' house with the Halo 3 disc in his hand. Despite the chaos, Heidi remained level-headed and reacted instantly. She grabbed the phone, immediately called emergency services, reporting that her brother had opened fire on their parents. She asked them to hurry because her mother showed no signs of life and her father was still conscious but seriously injured. The ambulance and law enforcement officers arrived at the scene. They confirmed the death of Susan. Mark was still fighting for his life. Daniel was neither in the house nor around it, so they immediately started looking for him. First, Daniel went to the home of a friend in the neighborhood to play, but unfortunately, the friend was not at home. Daniel did not particularly wash away the consequences of his actions. He could not even hide, nor could he play his favorite game. He was detained around 7 p.m. when he was just wandering around the area, trying to meet with one of his friends who had a free console. When Daniel was detained, he behaved very nervously and did not cooperate with the police. Daniel insisted that he did not attack at his loved ones and began to talk about a robber, but this version did not seem plausible, especially given the testimony of his sister, who had actually caught him at the crime scene. Then, Daniel changed his story, claiming that it was his father who attacked first and that he was forced to shoot in self-defense. Daniel made an attempt to justify his terrible actions and shifted the blame for what happened onto his father. He described his father, the pastor, as a cruel tyrant who had kept all family members in fear for years. Of course, it was not difficult to check this claim, but it took additional time. Susan ended up on the forensic experts table. It turned out that she managed to dodge the first bullet fired from the revolver. It passed her by. The second bullet hit her breast, the third hit her right hand, and the last shot was fatal. She died instantly due to her injuries. The situation remained critical for Mark. Doctors did everything possible to save him, but he lost consciousness and fell into a coma right on the operating table. At the same time, Daniel was in the interrogation room, and his story was carefully checked by investigators. Experienced detectives had no trouble recognizing the lies in the words of Daniel. Soon, Daniel provided a new version of what happened. According to him, on the day of the tragedy, he was in his room while his father was walking around the apartment, loudly arguing with his wife. At some point, Daniel noticed that his father was walking quickly towards his office. After Mark left, several shots were heard. Daniel was in shock. He came out of his room and found his mother lying on the floor. He stopped and froze in shock as Mark pointed a gun at him. But according to Daniel's confession, Mark spared him at the last moment by shooting himself in the head, apparently realizing the seriousness of the crime Mark had committed. Of course, no one believed this new story either. The guy was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, attempted aggravated murder, and falsification of evidence. Mark spent 2 weeks in a coma and eventually came to his senses miraculously. He lost all bodily functions, had to learn to walk again. In addition, he did not remember anything. The bullet did not enter the brain but traveled through the cheekbone, breaking the jaw, severely injuring the scalp, but it did not touch the brain or the cervical spine. During his 2-week coma, he required 5 serious operations on his face. During this period, Mark experienced very strong post-traumatic stress disorder and even shook constantly. Nevertheless, he gradually worked towards restoring his health and usual abilities. However, Mark still has difficulties with some simple physical movements and continues to suffer emotionally. At that time, it was not the right moment to give up and sink into depression. The police were determined to achieve justice. Mark found himself in a serious emotional crisis, which only exacerbated matters, so doctors recommended they giving him a little more time. Soon, he pulled himself together and was able to communicate with detectives. Mark said that at some point, he even thought about killing his son, but as a pastor of the church, this method seemed unacceptable to him. Then, he turned to God for help, and as a result, he managed to forgive his wayward son. It took a lot of time, during which Mark quoted a phrase from the Bible, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." This became a real mantra that gradually helped him forgive Daniel for everything that had happened. The Petrick family also took a long time to reach this point, but even the sisters admitted that they did not hold a grudge against their brother. The reason for the shooting of their parents, namely the game Halo 3, sparked significant public interest, and many people condemned the cruelty in video games. Parents were worried that the same fit of cruelty could happen to their children. The possible influence of such games on teenagers seemed indisputable to some. In the end, people accused the game and the developers of being responsible for Daniel taking up arms. This caused serious public controversy. Even the preliminary hearings turned out to be very intense and emotional. By this moment, those close to Daniel had already dealt with their feelings of anger. They wanted to demonstrate acceptance of the situation and quickly put an end to the matter. In turn, Daniel showed remorse, complained that he missed his mother. Despite the fact that he cried practically throughout the entire trial, the prosecution insisted that the defendant was merely trying to deceive everyone and, in fact, did not feel any remorse. Mark was the most injured party. He had undergone several complex operations, and the consequences of the injuries he received would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had lost his wife, and at one point, he had almost lost his son. Mark visited his son every weekend while awaiting the hearings. Mark even believed that his son was experiencing strong pain, and Daniel himself repeatedly stated this, regretting that his mother could not be brought back. When it came to the hearings, Daniel unexpectedly waived his right to a jury trial. Despite his lawyer's advice, he decided to leave the decision of his fate to a single judge. He believed that this would be fair since he had become the only person responsible for his mother's fate. The state ultimately decided to try him as a minor. Thanks to this, the death penalty did not apply to him. However, Daniel risked receiving a life sentence with the possibility of parole. During the hearings, the defense tried from the very beginning to the game and the console as sources of the problems. They insisted that he had no history of violence and that his strong attachment to video games arose from the spinal injury he suffered, during which he spent a long time recovering at home. The lawyers attempted to evoke pity by citing that their client was forced to stay at home for an extended period, practically without going outside. Naturally, he had to do something. He found solace in video games, which turned out to be a real evil. However, the prosecution continued to maintain that this was an attempt to deliberately harm his loved ones in cold blood. Miraculously escaping death, his older sister could have become the third victim if her husband had not intervened, or the number of victims could have reached 4. According to the prosecution, any unintentional actions were excluded. For about a week after the murder of his mother and the wounding of his father, Daniel did not intend to call for help. They understood that Daniel wanted to stage a murder and voluntarily end one's own life. Of course, against this background, the direction of the shot was not well thought out, since Mark would not have been able to hit himself in the back of the head under any circumstances. Apparently, the criminal was going to stage a murder. He might have succeeded if his older sister had not returned home earlier than she had promised. Daniel refused to comment on his plans in court. The lawyers believed that all this was speculation and that the staging was not intentional. In 2007, the topic of video games in the context of this crime became a significant issue. The views and attitudes of people were very ambivalent regarding this type of leisure activity. The format of Halo 3 was relatively new, and the older generation knew nothing about it. As a result, there were clearly biased and overly emotional interpretations. Parents feared for their children due to cases of addiction and seizures. The case of Daniel was, to a large extent, indicative and was actively used by opponents of the gaming industry. When the hearings began, the judge's opinion was unambiguous and radical. He stated that Daniel was clearly under the influence of his passions and entertainment, akin to alcohol or illegal substances, which hindered his ability to distinguish between the game and real life. Daniel took up arms, mistakenly believing that he could kill his loved ones without any consequences. They would simply come back to life in the next round. The judge insisted that video games were like hard addictives. They decomposed the soul and body of a teenager. This viewpoint resonated strongly with concerned parents, as well as with Mark. However, later, this categorical position was repeatedly criticized. Despite decades of research, there is still no scientific evidence linking video games to real-world violence. Not all killers are gamers, and not all gamers take up arms. There is no clear connection between them. It seemed to Mark's family that too much attention was being paid to the gaming industry. In June 2009, the judge sentenced Daniel Petrick to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 23 years, which is the minimum sentence. The maximum sentence he faces is life without parole, as recommended by the prosecutor. Petrick is currently serving his sentence at the Grafton Correctional Institution and will be eligible for parole in 2030. Daniel will be 40 years old by the time he is eligible for release. After what happened, Mark had a long road to recovery and was eventually able to remarry. He now remembers Susan fondly and often wonders if Daniel could have changed anything. He continues to visit Daniel regularly in prison. The tragedy of the Petrick family in Wellington, Ohio, remains a haunting reminder of how quickly personal struggles can spiral into unimaginable consequences. Daniel Petrick's actions on October 20, 2007, shattered the quiet life of a close-knit community, leaving Susan's memory cherished and Mark forever altered by physical and emotional scars. Yet, through the lens of forgiveness, Mark and Heidi chose a path of healing, even as they grappled with loss. This case challenges us to reflect on family dynamics, the complexities of addiction, and the enduring power of compassion in the face of heartbreak, urging society to seek understanding over blame in addressing such profound human conflicts. On April 11, 2016, in the quiet town of Royston, Hertfordshire, a chilling mystery began. Helen Bailey, 51, a successful author known for her Electra Brown series, seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her fiancé, Ian Stewart, 55 years old, with whom she shared a home, reported her missing 4 days later. Helen's beloved dachshund, Boris, had also disappeared. Stewart claimed he had found a note from Helen stating she needed some time alone and had gone to their holiday home in Broadstairs. However, as days turned into weeks with no sign of Helen or Boris, those who knew her best began to suspect that something far more sinister was at play. Helen Bailey was born on August 22, 1964, in Ponteland. She grew up in a supportive family environment and developed an early interest in writing. Initially aspiring to become a forensic scientist, she pursued a degree in psychology. However, she transitioned into a career in media and marketing, working on projects for popular children's characters such as Rugrats and Garfield. In 1996, Helen married John Sinfield, the head of a licensing rights company. They enjoyed a successful life together until tragedy struck in February 2011 when John drowned while swimming during their holiday in Barbados. Following his death, Helen began processing her grief through writing and started the blog Planet Grief, which resonated with many who were also experiencing loss. This blog not only served as an outlet for her emotions but also helped her connect with others facing similar challenges. It was through this platform that she eventually met Ian Stewart, leading to a new chapter in her life. Helen was financially secure, with assets exceeding £3 million and a life insurance policy valued at £1.8 million. This financial stability would later play a significant role in the investigation into her disappearance and subsequent murder. Helen's estate included substantial properties in Royston and Broadstairs, which she intended for Ian to inherit, reflecting her trust in him. Helen met Ian Stewart in October 2011 through her blog Planet Grief, where both shared their experiences of loss after the deaths of their respective spouses. Their connection grew as they bonded over their shared grief, ultimately leading to a romantic relationship. As their relationship progressed, Helen and Stewart moved in together, blending their families. Stewart had two adult sons from his previous marriage, and Helen brought her beloved dog, Boris, into the new household. They appeared to be building a life together, making plans for marriage and creating a family unit that included Stewart's children. However, the dynamics of their relationship were complex. On April 11, 2016, Helen was last seen in Royston, Hertfordshire. Leading up to her disappearance, Helen was actively engaged in planning her upcoming wedding to Stewart. On that day, she visited various wedding venues, indicating her excitement for the future. Later that afternoon, Helen left a note for Stewart stating that she needed some time alone. This note suggested she intended to go to her holiday home in Broadstairs. However, it was later established that she had not traveled there. Helen's sudden absence was out of character for someone who had been looking forward to a new chapter in her life. The note and her activities on the day of her disappearance would become crucial pieces of evidence as the investigation unfolded. The search efforts involved both police and volunteers. Officers conducted house-to-house inquiries in the local area seeking information from neighbors and anyone who might have seen Helen or her dog, Boris. Search teams also scoured nearby parks where she was known to walk. Witnesses later confirmed seeing Helen walking Boris between 3:40 p.m. and 3:50 p.m. on April 11th, further establishing her last known movements. Despite these efforts, no leads initially emerged, leading investigators to consider the possibility that something more serious had occurred. The lack of evidence regarding Helen's sudden absence heightened the urgency of the investigation, setting the stage for deeper scrutiny of Ian Stewart's actions and statements regarding her disappearance. Notably, inconsistencies in Stewart's accounts began to raise suspicions about his involvement. As the investigation into Helen's disappearance progressed, significant leads emerged. On April 16, 2016, investigators discovered that Stewart's mobile phone had connected to the Wi-Fi network at Helen's holiday cottage in Kent. This connection occurred just one day after she was reported missing. The prosecution would later argue that this connection was a critical piece of evidence suggesting that Stewart had visited the holiday cottage after reporting Helen missing, potentially to stage a cover-up. Further scrutiny of financial records revealed suspicious bank activity after Helen went missing. Stewart increased a standing order from Helen's personal bank account to their joint account from £400 to £4,000 per month. This sudden increase raised immediate red flags for investigators. Additionally, investigators noted that Stewart attempted to use power of attorney over Helen's financial affairs shortly after she went missing, further implying his intent to control her assets. Moreover, investigators found evidence of Stewart's online searches related to how to dispose of a body and inquiries about life insurance policies. These searches added another layer of suspicion regarding Stewart's intentions and actions. Shortly after reporting Helen missing, Stewart took a holiday to Spain. His absence from the search effort and lack of engagement with the investigation prompted law enforcement to scrutinize his actions more closely. Upon his return from Spain, Stewart was questioned by police regarding his movements. The inconsistencies in his account of events were noted during these interviews. On July 11, 2016, police arrested Stewart on suspicion of murder. A significant breakthrough occurred in the investigation into Helen Bailey's disappearance. The police conducted a search of Helen's home in Royston. During this search, officers discovered human remains hidden in a cesspit beneath the garage. Along with the body, the remains of a dog were also found. The cesspit was located under a concrete slab and was not accessible without excavation. Upon uncovering the bodies, forensic teams immediately began their work. The bodies were confirmed to be those of Helen Bailey and her dog Boris. It conducting an autopsy to determine the cause of death. The findings revealed that Helen had been drugged with a sedative commonly used to treat insomnia, indicating that she had been incapacitated before her death. The condition of the body suggested foul play. Helen's remains showed signs consistent with suffocation. This evidence was critical in establishing a timeline and method of murder. On July 16, 2016, Stewart was formally charged with multiple offenses, including murder, preventing the course of justice, and preventing a lawful burial. Following the charges, Stewart was remanded in custody pending further legal action. On July 19, 2016, Stewart made his first court appearance at St. Albans Crown. During this initial hearing, the formal charges against him were presented to the court. The prosecution outlined the evidence that had been gathered thus far, which included critical findings from forensic investigations and witness testimonies, as well as his financial motives. The prosecution emphasized the gravity of the situation, indicating that they would be seeking a conviction based on substantial evidence linking Stewart to Helen's murder. In August, the investigation into Ian Stewart's involvement in Helen's murder continued to intensify as authorities focused on gathering critical evidence. Investigators directed their efforts toward scrutinizing Stewart's financial activities. They analyzed communications between Stewart and various financial institutions, particularly in relation to her assets. On October 12, Stewart appeared in court for a plea hearing. During this session, he formally pleaded not guilty to all charges brought against him. The next court hearing is scheduled for January 2017. His defense team began preparing their strategy, aiming to counter the evidence that had been gathered during the investigation. On January 9, 2017, both prosecution and defense presented their initial statements outlining the key arguments that would shape the trial. The allegations against Ian Stewart were as follows. The prosecution laid out serious claims, asserting that he had drugged Helen with Zopiclone for several months prior to her murder. They contended that this drug was part of a calculated plan to incapacitate her, ultimately leading to her suffocation. After killing Helen, Stewart disposed of her body in a cesspit located beneath their home. They introduced several critical pieces of evidence to support their claims. Investigations revealed that Stewart's mobile phone had connected to the Wi-Fi network at Helen's holiday cottage in Kent shortly after she was reported missing. The prosecution also highlighted attempts by Stewart to use power of attorney over Helen's financial affairs. Apart from the evidence, the prosecution also presented several witnesses, including family and friends as well as forensic experts. Family and friends described Helen's state of mind leading up to her disappearance, expressing concerns about her well-being and highlighting observations regarding her relationship with Stewart, suggesting it may not have been as stable as portrayed. Forensic experts testified about the autopsy findings, confirming drugging and the cause of death. They indicated that traces of Zopiclone were found in Helen's system, corroborating the prosecution's claims regarding her incapacitation prior to death. In contrast to the prosecution's assertions, Stewart claimed during his defense that Helen had been kidnapped by two men on the day she disappeared. He alleged that he had not reported this to the police initially in an effort to protect her and claimed that these kidnappers demanded a ransom of £500,000. The defense attempted to portray Stewart as a caring partner who was deeply affected by Helen's disappearance. They argued that the prosecution's evidence was circumstantial and there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime. They aimed to challenge the reliability of the evidence against Stewart, suggesting that the testimonies were based on speculation rather than concrete proof. The defense attempted to introduce alternative scenarios that could explain Helen's disappearance without implicating Stewart, emphasizing their narrative of a possible kidnapping. The trial proceeded with critical cross-examinations that revealed significant inconsistencies in Stewart's statements regarding Helen and their relationship. The prosecution's questioning focused on discrepancies in Stewart's accounts of events leading up to Helen's disappearance. For instance, during police interviews, he had struggled to recall basic details about Helen, such as the color of her eyes and the address of their holiday home. These lapses raised doubts about his credibility and suggested a lack of genuine concern for her well-being. In the closing statement, the prosecution summarized their case against Ian Stewart, emphasizing the financial motivations and premeditated actions that led to Helen Bailey's murder. They reiterated that Stewart had a clear financial incentive to kill Helen, as he stood to gain significantly from her death through her life insurance policy and her substantial assets. The prosecution argued that Stewart meticulously planned the murder, drugging Helen with Zopiclone to incapacitate her before suffocating her. They painted a picture of a man who had deceived not only Helen but also those around him, orchestrating a facade of concern while plotting her murder for financial gain. Ultimately, the jury reached their verdict, finding Stewart guilty of murder. On February 23, 2017, Ian Stewart faced the sentencing hearing following his conviction for the murder of Helen Bailey. The courtroom was filled with those affected by the case, awaiting the judge's decision on the appropriate punishment for Stewart's actions. During the hearing, Judge Andrew Bright delivered a pointed and comprehensive address regarding Stewart's conduct and motivations. He described Stewart as a manipulative individual who had planned Helen's murder with clear premeditation. The judge emphasized that financial gain was the primary motive behind Stewart's actions, noting that he had orchestrated a scheme to benefit from Helen's considerable wealth. Following Judge Andrews' remarks, he announced the sentence for Ian Stewart: life imprisonment with a minimum term set at 34 years. The judge also took into account considerations for public safety regarding Stewart's future relationships, indicating that he posed a potential danger to women with whom he might form connections. The minimum term established would ensure that there would be significant time before any consideration for parole could be made. On August 21, 2018, following Ian Stewart's conviction for the murder of Helen Bailey, police initiated a re-examination of the circumstances surrounding the death of his first wife, Diane Stewart, who had died in 2010. The renewed investigation was prompted by concerns raised during the trial about the nature of Diane's death. Initially ruled an accident, the circumstances surrounding her passing began to draw scrutiny in light of Stewart's subsequent actions and the revelations about his character. Authorities sought to determine whether there were any connections between Diane's death and Ian's behavior, particularly given the manipulative tendencies he exhibited in his relationship with Helen. Stewart appeared in St. Albans Crown Court on July 6, 2020, facing charges related to Diane's murder. His defense during this trial was similar to that in Helen's case, where he attempted to deflect blame and present alternative narratives regarding the circumstances of her death. Ultimately, the jury found Ian Stewart guilty of Diane Stewart's murder on February 9, 2022. He was initially sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, which would have meant he would serve his sentence without the possibility of parole. This was later reduced to a minimum of 35 years by the Court of Appeal on July 29, 2022. The case of Helen Bailey is a harrowing example of betrayal, manipulation, and the tragic consequences of an abusive relationship. Ian Stewart's actions not only ended the life of a beloved author but also revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior that ultimately led to his conviction for 2 murders. Could earlier intervention have changed the course of events for both Helen and Diane Stewart? Regardless of the circumstances, Ian Stewart was found guilty and rightfully sentenced for his heinous crimes. Monday, May 5, 1997, was a public holiday. Schools were closed, and the children were not studying. It was cool and raining that day. Despite this, Jamie Lavis and his brother decided to go outside to play with other children. They lived in a quiet and peaceful suburb, in an area of Manchester called Openshaw, UK, where everyone knew each other well, so their parents did not worry about their safety, only occasionally glanced at them from the window. The brothers were almost unrestricted in their movements along the nearby street, where there was a supermarket, a bus stop, and several friends lived. Therefore, for several hours, no one suspected anything until Jamie's 11-year-old brother came home for afternoon tea without Jamie. His older brother said that they had warmed up in the shop while choosing sweets in the morning. However, at that time, no one was worried about Jamie. He was a mischievous child who could go out alone without his brother, but he always returned home in the evening because he was afraid of the dark. His mother, Karen, was sure that her son had met one of his friends, got carried away playing, and would return a little later. But when it began to get dark and the family gathered at the table for dinner, Jamie was still not there, which looked strange. Then, Karen sent one of her older daughters to look for Jamie, but the 12-year-old sister returned empty-handed. By the time Karen started to worry, her husband, John, returned home. He reassured her, saying that Jamie had most likely stayed with friends and would be back soon. Another hour passed, but the situation had not changed. Then the boy's parents went to look for him on their own. It was already completely dark. They checked the places he most often visited and played with friends, visiting several acquaintances, but they found no trace of Jamie. Around 10 p.m., Jamie's parents decided to go to the police and report that their 8-year-old son was missing. 2 days earlier, on Saturday, May 3rd, Jamie had also run away. He had returned unannounced late in the evening with pockets full of sweets. Jamie had also missed dinner that time, which had scared his family. Because of this, Jamie's father had punished him, but the boy did not want to stay home all day, so he had run away again on Sunday. However, his parents quickly caught him, brought him home, and the punishment was decided to be cancelled. Some of the boy's friends said that he did not want to return home after that incident because he was afraid of being grounded. Therefore, it seemed that Jamie was just outside somewhere, fearing punishment from his parents. The police began searching for him along the narrow streets of Openshaw. At that time, it was one of the poorest areas of Manchester, characterized by tangled streets, dense development, and a large number of abandoned houses and factories. Therefore, Jamie had many options for where to hide. Naturally, this also created an additional danger, as the buildings were often used by criminals to hide. The sheer number of abandoned buildings meant that the authorities faced a difficult and large-scale task in finding Jamie, which required a lot of time. After examining several dozen empty buildings and houses over the following days, it was decided to hold a press conference via television to inform the public about the disappearance of Jamie. Jamie's relatives still hoped that the child had simply run away, fearing punishment. The press conference was also attended by Karen, who begged her son to return home and promised that he would not get into any trouble. However, this did not help in any way. Days passed without any new information about Jamie. The city police involved more officers in the search operation, including specially trained dogs. The area was inspected with the help of a helicopter, and a team of divers explored the river flowing through Manchester. This search and rescue operation became the largest in the city, and information about it became widely known among locals due to the media's activity. Many volunteers joined the search. Crowds of concerned citizens took to the streets and tried to help find Jamie. However, the information did not provide any new clues. Jamie's disappearance was a significant blow to the Lavis family. His father even quit his job at Manchester Airport to devote more time to searching for his son. His mother also could not work full-time and spent all her free time searching for her son, just like the other adult children in the family. This significantly affected the financial situation of the Lavis, which was already modest. Jamie's older sister, who was 15 at the time, dropped out of school to look after the family's 3 youngest children, cook, and clean the house. The family's efforts were rewarded. They managed to find out that on the day of Jamie's disappearance, he was seen boarding city bus number 219. He was traveling from the city center towards a neighboring suburb called Ashton-under-Lyne. This sounded plausible, as Jamie loved buses and even dreamed of becoming a driver. Now it was time to find out what happened to Jamie afterward. Having learned about route number 219, Jamie's 15-year-old sister, who was also participating in the search with the rest of the family, went to the bus station to talk to several drivers at once. That's how she met a man named Darren Vickers. He admitted that on May 5th, he was driving that same bus, number 219, and saw a boy who, according to the description, looked very similar to Jamie. He was dressed in a dark blue tracksuit and boarded the bus at about 10:30 a.m. The time and description matched, and the information about his clothes had not been openly distributed, so she believed Darren. However, there were some oddities. Darren said that the boy introduced himself as Dale, and it was unclear why the child hid his real name. According to the driver, Jamie rode the bus all day because he had an unlimited travel pass that allowed him to make an unlimited number of trips throughout the city. The boy sat in the front part behind the driver, mostly silently looking out the window, sometimes chatting with the driver and some of the other passengers. According to Darren, at the final station, Ashton-under-Lyne, Jamie got on another bus that was going back to the city center. Then Darren saw him again. After making several trips back and forth, Jamie again found himself on Darren's bus. Darren asked him why he had been doing this all day and not going home. Jamie replied that he had nothing to do on his day off and had an unlimited travel pass, so he just decided to ride. Darren didn't see a problem with his desire and did not kick him off the bus. Several regular passengers on the route also confirmed that they had seen Jamie on the bus that day. After speaking with Jamie's sister, Darren Vickers said he would call the police to pass on this information. He later visited Jamie's parents at their home to tell them all this in person. He seemed very concerned, wanted to help in the search for Jamie and participated in disseminating information. During the entire search and rescue operation, the police station received about 300 statements from various residents of the city. All these requests were checked, but only 3 of them turned out to be true. At the same time, none of the sightings of Jamie occurred after Monday, May 5th, which confirmed the worst fears of the authorities. By mid-June, more than a month had passed since Jamie's disappearance. By this time, the police were able to obtain recordings from CCTV cameras located on some streets of the city, particularly at key points on bus route 219. This allowed them to partially confirm Darren Vickers' statements. On May 5th, Jamie wandered around the Ashton Underline bus station. He then boarded another bus at a different terminus. He made several trips back and forth. He was last seen on tape boarding the 219 bus heading towards Manchester. Grainy footage of Jamie was shown to the public. It was expected that witnesses would come forward who might provide clues about Jamie's subsequent movements. Jamie's disappearance shook the public. The police were sure that they were not dealing with a kidnapping or disappearance, but with murder, because too much time had passed to consider Jamie alive. Only his parents still retained hope for their son's safe return home. Karen and John continued to speak at press conferences in the hope of reaching more potential witnesses. During this time, they continued to go out every day and night to search and comb new areas of the city as well as the territory outside of it. Unfortunately, they were still unable to find any trace of their son. Almost 2 months passed, and on Tuesday, June 24, 1997, an anonymous report was received at the police station from an unknown man. A witness reported that the boy was buried in a shallow grave in a 190-acre wetland a few miles from his home. On June 27th, more than 100 police officers, along with dogs and divers, began combing the area. They moved in lines, probed the ground, examined the dense underbrush, and used thermal imaging equipment in the hope of finding at least some human remains. The search continued until Monday but yielded no results. During this period, the only suspect the police had was the driver of bus 219, Darren Vickers. After Jamie's disappearance, he became unusually close to the Lavis family. As soon as the sister of Jamie spoke to him, he personally approached them with an offer to help. John and Karen readily accepted his offer. They were desperate to do anything to find their son and welcomed the help of Darren. However, the police found his behavior suspicious. Darren Vickers was 27 years old. He was married and had 4 children, but even his family noticed his excessive passion for searching for Jamie. He began to spend most of his time searching and paid almost no attention to his household. He did not just comb the streets with other volunteers and Jamie's family, he even lent Jamie's mother and father his car so they could inspect areas far from home. By doing this, they were able to explore territories up to 20 kilometers away. When the parents of Jamie first heard that their son was most likely dead, they were so devastated that they could not participate in press conferences. Darren supported them, assured them that Jamie was alive and would return soon. He even took their place at the press conference, addressing the public in newspapers and on television while holding a photo of Jamie to begging for help. He became so close to the Lavis family that Jamie's parents described him as a member of the family and the strongest support in their search. From the outside, it all looked very strange. In the first days of the investigation, Darren was the prime suspect. He was arrested, interrogated, and held at the station for a total of 24 hours, but no evidence of his guilt could be found. The Lavis family was very happy when they learned that Darren was being released. John and Karen was sure that such a sympathetic person could not have been involved in the disappearance of their son and criticized the police while he was in custody for interrogation. However, law enforcement officers were not ready to write him off. A warrant was obtained to search Darren's car. Nothing was found in his house, but a bloodstain was discovered on the back seat of the car. DNA samples were collected in the same manner as from the Lavis family, but it was later found that this blood was associated with an accidental nosebleed in one of Darren's children. However, the close scrutiny from the police caused him great harm. The searches became a serious emotional test for him. He took sick leave, could not work, and eventually quit altogether. His relationship with his wife significantly worsened, and they separated. After his wife kicked Darren out of the house, Jamie's parents willingly took him in. They treated him with such respect that they allowed him to occupy the marital bedroom while they slept on the couch in the living room. Darren brought them food, looked after the children, and helped them with everything. They became so close during this period. After, Darren responded directly to several print publications and on television. He insisted that it was only thanks to his statements about Jamie that the police had any leads in their search. Despite the active support of the Lavis family, detectives had serious concerns about Darren, and none of them were accidental. When the main suspect first met the sister of Jamie, he promised to go to the police station but never did. Law enforcement officers themselves visited him only a week later when they learned about him from other witnesses. These same people also reported other disturbing information that contradicted Darren's story. While he claimed that Jamie sat on the bus the entire time and looked out the window, the passengers saw how Jamie actually acted as the driver's trusted person, running around the cabin, handing over payments and tickets for travel. Jamie sat in Darren's arms, while Darren stroked the boy's head and even gave him money for soda. The two behaved like very close individuals, so much so that some passengers thought Jamie and Darren were father and son. Furthermore, Darren initially claimed that Jamie had an unlimited travel pass, but the police knew that only adults could obtain such a pass. Even more disturbing were the recordings from the CCTV cameras. The footage taken at the bus stop captured not just one Jamie waiting for the bus. In fact, Darren approached him and ruffled Jamie's hair before getting on his bus, after which Jamie immediately followed him. Darren did not disclose this information to the detective, which made his concealment look more than suspicious. Another crucial fact that Darren hid was that Jamie not only rode between the final stops several times but was also on the bus for 6 hours until the very end of his shift. All these stories were confirmed only during lengthy interrogations. According to Darren, in the evening, he offered Jamie a ride home, but Jamie said that he did not want to go home because his parents could punish him. Thus, Darren dropped him off at his grandmother's house a few blocks from the Lavis and then drove home. Darren insisted that he lied because he was under suspicion and had no idea what happened to Jamie next. Detectives believed he was lying again. It was revealed that Darren was an officially convicted child molester. It was believed that on May 5, 1997, Jamie attracted the attention of child abuse Darren when he boarded the bus alone. Jamie loved this mode of transportation, making it easy for Darren to deceive him and gain his trust. Additionally, Jamie was upset with his family, was in no hurry to return home, and even thought about running away, which made him an ideal target for an attack. After the end of his work shift, Jamie was kidnapped by the driver. It was presumed that he was subsequently abused and murdered. Naturally, Darren denied everything. Instead of going to the police as he had promised, he went straight to Jamie's family and positioned himself as an indispensable assistant to John and Karen. It was believed that in doing so, he manipulated the family into staying informed about the investigation's progress and avoiding suspicion. This fixated interest in Jamie and his family became so consuming. Throughout the search operations, the police station continued to receive reports of places where Jamie had been seen. Very often, when detectives arrived at such calls, Darren and Karen were already there. It seemed strange how they managed to arrive at calls faster than the police. Later, detectives discovered that Darren had bought a police scanner and was constantly listening to law enforcement broadcasts. His active participation was a way to convince the Lavis family and investigators that he was not involved in Jamie's disappearance and death. Finally, by September 1997, 4 months after the disappearance, detectives completely shifted their attention to Darren. 3 of the man's closest friends, as well as his mother, sister, and ex-wife, were also detained. All were interrogated under the assumption that they could be involved in Jamie's disappearance. However, a few days after the interrogations, everyone was released because the suspicion of their complicity could not be confirmed. Since Jamie Lavis' disappearance on May 5, 1997, searches have been relentless across Openshaw and the surrounding areas of Manchester. Greater Manchester Police, working with local volunteers, regularly combed narrow streets, abandoned buildings, and vacant lots where Jamie might have been hiding or in danger. Patrols periodically checked the banks of the River Medlock and public areas such as parks, while appeals were made in the local media to encourage residents to come forward with clues. The Lavis family, along with many neighbors, joined search parties, hung posters, and went door to door asking questions, holding out hope that Jamie was simply hiding somewhere. These efforts, while not immediately successful, maintained public interest and strengthened the resolve to find the boy until new leads emerged in the autumn. Around the same time, several teenagers approached detectives with new disturbing information. They said that a stranger had caught them on the street and taken them to Reddish Vale Park, near Manchester. He had attracted their attention by showing them a photograph of Jamie Lavis. He claimed to be a law enforcement officer and began luring the teenagers into the thicket under the pretext of identifying Jamie's body, saying he believed he had found Jamie. The teenagers saw nothing and did not believe the stranger from the start. He continued to lead them into the open area until they were too scared and ran away. They did not contact the police immediately because they could not identify the man. But a few days later, they were watching TV and recognized a bus driver named Darren Vickers, who continued to participate in press conferences. The teenagers identified him as the man who had tried to lead them into the forest. The police needed at least some pretext to arrest him. After checking, they managed to find several serious traffic violations, as well as forged documents, which provided grounds for detention for up to 3 months. After receiving the teenager's statement, enough circumstantial evidence accumulated to bring charges. Therefore, in mid-October, Darren Vickers was arrested for the second time. A thorough search of the Reddish Vale Park area was organized. With the help of those same teenagers who contacted the police, the route that Darren had led them was traced. They indicated a particularly overgrown area with a large number of trees and very tall, dense bushes that were difficult to navigate. In a remote part of the area, a dark blue tracksuit was found under a tarpaulin, matching the description of the clothes Jamie was wearing on the day of his disappearance. When forensic experts examined the items found, a lower part of the jawbone fell out of the jacket. Law enforcement officers then returned to the area, where more bones were found scattered over a large area around the place where the clothes had been discovered. The skull and limbs were never found, but thanks to DNA analysis and dental records matching the lower jaw, it was possible to identify the remains. The bones belonged to the missing 8-year-old Jamie Lavis. By that time, the remains had almost completely decomposed. Only a part of the bones remained, which showed traces of having been dragged away and gnawed by wild animals. Considering their poor condition and the fact that not all parts were found, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of Jamie's death. The fact that the body was found without clothes probably indicates that the victim was abused before his death. Police speculated that after the murder, Darren had dismembered his victim and scattered the remains over a large area to avoid detection. It was assumed that Darren repeatedly visited this area because he liked to relive the crime in his mind. When Jamie's mother and father were informed that their child had been found and that Darren was the killer, they refused to believe it. Despite the fact that Karen identified the clothing and dental records, it took months for them to accept the harsh reality. The detectives seriously believed that, in fact, Darren Vickers had not only gotten close to the family to protect himself from authorities, but he was also prepared to strike again, likely targeting Jamie's brother, in order to kidnap and abuse him. He paid special attention to Jamie's brother when he was in the Lavis house during the search. Darren bought expensive gifts for Jamie's brother, including a bicycle and sneakers. Jamie's brother himself told investigators that Darren had repeatedly taken him on the bus during the search for Jamie before his dismissal. Once, Darren even took him to that same Reddish Vale Park and led him to the place where Jamie's body was later found. Jamie's brother was likely on the verge of death at that moment. As soon as all these facts were revealed, Darren Vickers was accused of killing Jamie Lavis. While in prison, he wrote a 15-page statement confessing to the crime. According to him, when he was driving Jamie home, he accidentally swerved the bus and hit the curb. Jamie fell and hit his head multiple times, after which he did not regain consciousness. Darren decided he had attempted to hide the body, eventually discarding it in the park. He labeled the incident as an accident and denied any intention of murder. However, they did not believe him. After all, if it had been an accident, why didn't he just go to the police? Why was it necessary to dismember Jamie's body? A man with a dark past related to violence against children was clearly trying to hide something in this way. Later, Darren retracted his confession and claimed that he was not involved in Jamie's death. The trial was scheduled for March of 1999. Darren attributed his confession to pressure from the authorities. A new version was presented before the jury, where Darren accused Jamie's father of murder, insisting that John was prone to violence. Furthermore, during the trial, Darren began to claim that he had repeatedly had intimate relations with Jamie's mother and even insisted that her baby was his and not John's. She denied this. A DNA test was conducted which confirmed that the father of the child was John, not Darren. However, journalists eagerly picked up on these statements and spread the information, undermining the trust of the Lavis family. Local residents became wary of their family. This was Darren's biggest blow to the family that had trusted him. The lie provoked the emergence of new unpleasant rumors suggesting that Karen had slept with her son's killer and was possibly involved in the crime. Jamie's father also tried to refute the lie, stating that he had never been cruel to his children and could not have killed his son. In any case, all this caused great damage to the Lavis family, adding to their emotional traumas. After a 2-day deliberation, Darren Vickers was found guilty of murdering Jamie Lavis. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and also received 4 additional years for kidnapping. At the same time, the court retained the right for Darren to apply for parole after 25 years in prison. Until the end of the trial, Darren did not admit his guilt. However, less than 24 hours after the sentencing began, he requested to speak with the lead investigator in the case. The detective arrived in his cell. Here, through tears, he confessed to kidnapping Jamie and abusing Jamie on the bus. Darren acknowledged that he had slandered Jamie's mother and father. Now he expressed regret, apologized to the family, and wanted them to find peace after his confession. Darren then attempted to appeal his sentence twice, but both times were unsuccessful. His first attempt for conditional early release occurred in February 2023 when he was 56 years old. However, the commission decided that he would always pose a danger to children, so they recommended against releasing him. Nevertheless, Darren will have many more attempts. Whether the authorities will be able to keep such a dangerous criminal behind bars forever is unknown. The Jamie Lavis case is a heartbreaking tragedy that has not only claimed the life of an 8-year-old boy, but has left a deep wound in the Lavis family and the Openshaw community. Darren Vickers' manipulative and cruel actions have destroyed trust and exploited the kindness of a family desperate to find their son. Although justice has been served with a life sentence, the trauma Jamie's family has endured will never be erased. This story serves as a warning of the dangers lurking within society and highlights the importance of vigilance and the ongoing effort to protect the most vulnerable. Hopefully, in time, the Lavis family will find some peace amid their irreparable loss. Kristina Joksimovic was named one of the most attractive women in Switzerland at the Miss Switzerland contest in 2007. 17 years later, the name Kristina is back in the spotlight, this time for the saddest and most tragic reasons. It all started with a phone call from her children's kindergarten. She did not come to pick them up at the end of the day. Naturally, her parents were very concerned about the sudden disappearance of their daughter, but her husband seemed not to be worried at all. Since less than 24 hours had passed since Kristina's disappearance, the authorities refused to intervene. Then, her father decided to take matters into his own hands and began searching the house. What he found was truly horrifying. Switzerland is one of the central mountain states of Europe, a country full of lakes, villages, and high alpine peaks. There are many ski resorts and hiking trails. If we drive about an hour north of Bern or an hour west of Zurich, we will find yourself in a city located right on the border with France and Germany, a cozy town called Basel. This is a wonderful place for walks, with Gothic cathedrals, red stone buildings, and the Rhine River, which flows through the city. To the southwest of Basel is a small commune called Binningen. It was on the night of February 13th, 2024, that a terrifying discovery was made that shook the whole city. It all started the day before when the grandparents received a phone call from their granddaughter's kindergarten. Their daughter Christina, a former model and successful businesswoman, did not pick up her children after school. This was very strange because she loved her children and was always an extremely responsible mother. The situation became even more suspicious because the children's father also did not answer calls. The grandparents returned to Christina's family home, where they found Thomas, Christina's husband, but Christina was not there. The most surprising thing was that Thomas looked absolutely calm, as if nothing had happened. He said that he did not know where his wife was and offered her father a drink. For a few hours, he acted as if nothing had happened and looked quite cheerful. He spoke to Christina's parents as if it were a normal day, then said goodbye to the children, wished them good night, and sent them to bed. Her father was deeply concerned about the fate of his daughter. Instead of going home, he decided to thoroughly examine everything. Christina and Thomas lived in a prestigious house in Binningen. It was a rather large estate with many secluded corners and alleys, so it took Christina's father some time to go around all the rooms and then go outside. Eventually, he went down to the laundry room, which was in the basement of the house. This room was more like an isolated bunker with thick concrete walls and a steel door closing it. When he finally went inside, he noticed several large garbage bags lying in the corner of the room. From one of them, which made him horrified, blonde hair was sticking out. Unfortunately, in the bag was his daughter's head. Upon opening the bag and realizing what had happened, he ran out of the house screaming and calling for help. Soon after that, the police received the call from he reported that his daughter had been brutally murdered. It also became clear that her husband was most likely guilty of her death. Christina's career is one of the most interesting. Her path from one success to another inspires many. Although Christina was born and raised in Binningen and had lived most of her life there, she had Serbian roots thanks to her parents. When Christina became an adult in 2003, she won the Miss Northwest Switzerland contest, and in 2007 she entered the finals of the Miss Switzerland contest. In addition, she received other awards in this field. It is safe to say that she had classic beauty, but her talents were not limited to modeling. Her potential was revealed even more after she finished her career on the catwalk. As she grew older, Christina opened her own business, teaching other women how to walk in high-profile fashion shows and catwalk events. She helped Miss Switzerland contestants follow her example and also taught them how to walk confidently in their professional lives. Her Instagram page describes her as a high-heel expert, motivator, entrepreneur, and mother. Christina has conducted personal training with clients, hosted masterclasses on how to walk in high heels, and promoted confidence, femininity, and body positivity on her website. At the same time, Christina worked as an IT recruitment specialist while her business grew. In her personal life, Christina was a strong woman who dedicated herself to supporting and inspiring other women. In addition to her career as a model, entrepreneur, and consultant, she had two daughters, Vera, born in 2020, and Kira Sophie, born in 2021. Judging by the many photos on the internet, it is clear how much she loved her family. Christina was a kind and friendly person. She was distinguished by her devotion to her family. However, although many people have positive emotions about Christina, the same cannot be said about her husband. Many of her relatives viewed him as hot-tempered. For 3 years, he was a respected leader in the field of management changes in the Basel area, largely due to his father, who ensured his future as a millionaire and lawyer. On his LinkedIn page, Thomas described himself as a goal-driven entrepreneur. According to him, life is about people and their interactions. Judging by his posts, Thomas was an extremely boring person. His life seemed as monotonous. When they got married, their wedding was beautiful, held in a castle overlooking the hills and fields. After that, they had 2 wonderful daughters. Everything seemed perfect from the outside, or at least this is how it looked on social networks. On the internet, many photos where they looked madly in love, picnics in the park, hugs on the floor, joint selfies at home. It seemed they had an ideal life, but the reality was far from simple. The truth is, Christina's friends were extremely unhappy with Thomas's behavior, especially in the last months before her death. One of her friends recalled that they had a crisis that lasted for several months. The police were even called to their house after the situation escalated into violence. Thomas was obsessed with their children, viewing them as an ideal project, and Christina, in his opinion, was only a hindrance. Thomas considered himself better than everyone else, which was especially evident on children's birthdays when he divided the guests into two sides, his family and hers, celebrating the holidays separately. One of Christina's ex-girlfriends told the prosecutor that Thomas had used serious violence against her on multiple occasions. Thomas's ex-partner had already testified against him, mentioning his terrible outbursts of anger. He once ran over her foot with a car and another time threatened to throw her out of the car on the way home. He allegedly grabbed her by the neck and forcefully pressed her against the wall during arguments. Thomas often lost control, which ended in punches or attempts to strangle her. As it turned out, Christina was not his first victim. While alive, Christina continued to post beautiful photos on social media, firmly believing that Thomas was the ideal husband who would never harm her. In old photos, she called him her support and proudly announced her second pregnancy. Just a few months before the tragedy, she shared a photo of her family with the caption, "My world." The irony is that it was Thomas who destroyed this world. Now, the evidence against Thomas speak for themselves. At the moment, Thomas initially claimed that he did not kill Christina. He stated that he found her in the laundry and, in a panic, dismembered her body. However, realizing that the evidence against him was too strong, he confessed to the murder. Although he tried to justify himself by claiming he acted in self-defense, asserting that Christina allegedly attacked him with a knife, forensic experts refuted this version. Based on the bruises on her neck, it became clear that she had been strangled. This was not all. An autopsy showed that Christina had been decapitated with a hacksaw, a knife, and garden shears. Thomas also dislocated her hip joints and then proceeded to dismember her body. The most disturbing detail was that Thomas cut out one organ, Christina's uterus, leading experts to suggest that he may have had ulterior motives. Additionally, he crushed it in a powerful hand blender and dissolved other parts of her body in a chemical solution. Those parts of her body that were not subjected to these two horrific methods showed signs of blunt trauma even before Christina's death, including cuts on her cheek, under her eyebrow and nose, bruises on her leg and foot, as well as on her shoulder blades and the back of her head. There was also evidence found on her head that strands of her hair had been pulled out. Most of these horrific acts were committed in the laundry room, as evidence and physical artifacts found at the crime scene showed. Thomas spent several hours over his wife's body before returning to his life as if nothing had happened. He even looked into her father's eyes, shared a drink with him, and assured him that Christina would return soon. After thoroughly searching the house, her father came upon his daughter's head, a discovery that one could hardly imagine. What exactly drove Thomas to murder his wife remains a mystery. Without the help of experts, one can only speculate and make too many assumptions. Nevertheless, we have a confession, and we know from her review that Christina planned to divorce Thomas. Perhaps this was what drove him to the brink of insanity. Surprisingly, after his arrest, Thomas tried to secure his release from custody through the court for compulsory measures in Basel. After being refused, he appealed to the cantonal court, where he was also denied. Finally, he appealed to the federal court, but there he was unlucky. According to the results of the investigation, it seems there are signs of a mental disorder. His attempts to hide his wife's death, then act like nothing happened in front of her father are evidence of sociopathy, without him showing a drop of emotion. The only question is whether he will be found guilty and what term he will receive. In Switzerland, the death penalty is prohibited. For murder, the minimum term is 10 years, extending up to life imprisonment. However, even a life sentence may allow for release after 15 years. Unfortunately, there is a possibility that Thomas will one day return to society. After being denied bail by the Swiss Federal Court in September 2024, Thomas remains in custody awaiting trial for the murder of Christina Joksimovic. Prosecutors have concluded that Christina was strangled to death, with bruises on her neck and body indicating severe violence before her death, rejecting Thomas's claim of self-defense that she attacked him with a knife. Forensic reports confirm that Christina's body was dismembered in the laundry room with a chainsaw, a knife, and garden shears, and that some of her body parts were then chopped up with a hand blender and dissolved in a chemical solution. The trial has yet to begin, but prosecutors have described Thomas as displaying high criminal energy and sociopathic traits, with a history of domestic violence, including strangling Christina. While awaits her verdict, Christina is remembered as a strong woman whose legacy is her love for her two daughters and the people she inspired. In addition, Christina's family is now forced to fight for custody of her children. Her parents and sister have banded together to provide the girls with a safe and loving home. However, Thomas's sister has also filed for custody, claiming that Christina's parents are too overprotective. This has led to a major legal battle, with Thomas's sister supported by their millionaire father and his lawyers. It is a very difficult fight for Christina's family. Thomas's actions should deprive him of any rights to the children. Christina's children deserve to grow up in a home where they will not be asked about the truth of who their father was. Besides, the family has suffered too much pain and loss to also lose their grandchildren after the death of their daughter. Christina was a strong, confident, and outstanding woman. She was always full of energy and new ideas, constantly supporting friends and family. Despite her boss-like energy, she was a caring and loving mother who was completely dedicated to her children. Now, these children will grow up without their amazing mother. 8 months after her death, their house is completely abandoned. The furniture may still be standing inside, but the house itself is dark and empty. On the grave, there are photographs, 2 crosses, small hearts made of stones, and drawings by her daughters. It is evident that many people miss her very much. Unfortunately, Christina's story did not have the fair and bright end her fate deserved. Her strength, love, selflessness will live on in the memory of those who knew and loved her, as well as in her children, who will grow up knowing about the incredible woman who was their mother. However, life goes on. Despite the terrible losses, Christina's family does not give up. There are people in this world who are ready to fight for light, for truth, and for the future of her children. Jose Breton was born in Cordoba in 1973. October 8, 2011, he placed a frantic call to emergency services, reporting that his 2 young children had vanished while playing in a nearby park. The call mobilized a large number of police, relatives, and neighbors, hoping the children would return safely. But behind that urgent plea lay a sinister truth that would soon grip the nation with horror. Jose came from a stable, middle-class household, shaped by a conservative upbringing and a rigid religious framework. After completing his formal education, he chose a military path, eventually attaining the rank of infantry corporal. His service took him to war-torn Bosnia, where he operated as an ambulance driver. The brutal realities of that conflict left deep psychological scars, culminating in his desertion and return to civilian life. It was during this chapter that he encountered Ruth Ortiz, an aspiring veterinary student. Their relationship developed rapidly, and by 2002, after 4 years together, they were married. However, the marriage was troubled from the outset. Jose had openly expressed his aversion to fatherhood, warning that should they have children, Ruth would shoulder the full burden. Despite his resistance, Ruth eventually gave birth to 2 children, a daughter, also named Ruth, and later, a son, Jose. While he appeared to tolerate their daughter, the arrival of their son seemed to trigger a descent into emotional volatility. His control over Ruth intensified, and his behavior grew increasingly oppressive. Gradually, he alienated her from friends and family. Obsessive and consumed by an intense fear of germs, Jose developed compulsive behaviors that bordered on pathological. He refused to use public restrooms or ride public transport unless he could meticulously sanitize the environment. Inside the home, he enforced strict rules. The children were ordered to wash their hands immediately upon entering and were expected to eat in complete silence. Jose, unable to tolerate noise, often wore earplugs to escape even the sounds of his own household. For Ruth, years of emotional manipulation abuse eventually led her to seek professional help. A psychologist helped her identify Jose's behavior as not only abnormal but also deeply harmful. With that clarity came the resolve to escape. In September 2011, Ruth informed Jose of her decision to divorce him. Instead of accepting the separation, Jose began therapy, ostensibly an attempt to change. He met with a psychologist to manage his growing anxiety, but the sessions had little effect. There were signs that Jose's mental health had long been fragile. At the age of 15, he had attempted suicide after a failed relationship, an early indication of his emotional instability. As the divorce proceedings progressed, his behavior became more erratic. He repeatedly contacted his therapist and was prescribed medication, though it seems ineffective in calming his deteriorating mental state. Ruth, focused on creating a new life, moved to Huelva with the children and took refuge at her mother's home. Jose returned to Córdoba. They reached a custody agreement allowing him to see the children every other weekend. On the afternoon of October 8th, Jose phoned the police, stating that his two children, then 6 and 2 years old, had disappeared while playing at the park. He claimed they had run off and vanished from sight. Authorities reacted swiftly, initiating a widespread search effort involving law enforcement, emergency responders, and even local taxi drivers. Missing persons posters featuring the children's faces were plastered across the city. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a kidnapping. But as the hours passed, inconsistencies began to emerge. One big warning sign was that he did not report the children missing until 9 p.m., hours after the children were last believed to have been seen. During his interview with police, Jose suggested that someone from Ruth's family might be responsible for the children's disappearance. However, this theory quickly unraveled when it was confirmed that Ruth and her relatives were all in Huelva at the time, nowhere near Córdoba. Upon learning what had happened, Ruth's immediate reaction was suspicion. She wasted no time and returned to Córdoba at once. Rallying support from her neighbors and family, she organized a vigil, praying for the safe return of her children. As the days wore on, investigators began shifting their attention more closely to Jose's psychological profile. His erratic behavior, history of emotional volatility, and obsessive need for control made him an increasingly suspicious figure. Initially, he had said the children vanished while walking with him. Later, he claimed he had driven to the park and, momentarily distracted by a text message, lost track of them. He also alleged that earlier in the day, the children had been with his sister before he took them to a remote property on the outskirts of Córdoba, arriving around 1:15 p.m. According to him, the children had remained asleep in the car while he set a fire on the property, supposedly to destroy Ruth's personal belongings. He insisted it was a symbolic gesture, an attempt to put the past behind him and rid himself of painful memories. Then, at approximately 5 p.m., he claimed to have gone to the park to meet his brother and nephews, stating once more that the children were still asleep in the vehicle. There were many contradictions in his explanation. To get to the bottom of it, officers decided to inspect the rural property that very night. Jose accompanied them, his demeanor strangely composed. What they found there disturbed them deeply. A deeper search of his car revealed troubling items, sharp kitchen tools, and a roll of duct tape. Jose claimed they were simply leftover materials from the family's recent move, but the explanation did little to ease suspicion. The children's disappearance was gaining attention, and authorities pressed Jose with more questions. This time, they obtained security camera footage from the roads between his property and the park. Jose's car could be seen in the footage, but curiously, the children were nowhere in sight. Meanwhile, multiple witnesses at the park recalled seeing Jose alone that day. With the fire now completely extinguished, they closely examined the charred remains. Beneath the ashes, they discovered a peculiar arrangement, a rectangular trench and an overturned iron table, tools likely used to increase the fire's intensity. Sifting through the debris, they uncovered small, fragile bone fragments. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigative team. There was a real possibility that the bones could belong to the missing children. Still, Jose attempted to dismiss the find. He explained that he had incinerated some of Ruth's old possessions, including veterinary materials, books, clothes, and even taxidermied animals used during her studies. But the authorities were unconvinced. They reached out to Ruth and informed her of what had been found. A forensic anthropologist was called in to assess the material. Expert analysis showed that these bones are not human. They appeared to belong to a variety of animals, mostly rodents and small carnivores. While this initially seemed to reduce the weight of suspicion, the investigation was far from over. Jose showed no signs of distress, no urgency, no grief, nothing that would suggest a father desperate to find his children. At this point, the bonfire became the centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic testing showed that it had been fueled with gasoline and consumed nearly 600 pounds of firewood. Several neighbors later came forward, reporting that they had seen the fire burning as early as 3 p.m., a direct contradiction to Jose's claim that it had started later. They also described the smoke as thick and unusually foul-smelling, so strong that it could be smelled from miles away. Investigators began to suspect it might have been the method used to eliminate the children's remains. They excavated the site, hoping to uncover conclusive evidence. But the excavation itself, though thorough, destroyed much of the original layout, possibly erasing key forensic clues in the process. Under mounting pressure, investigators urged Jose to tell the truth. But he remained cold and insistent in his denial, refusing to admit any involvement in the children's disappearance. Meanwhile, Ruth and her family remained active in their search, holding out hope that the children might still be alive. The case had now become a national obsession. News broadcasts, newspapers, and online platforms displayed the children's faces daily. On October 12, 2011, Jose Breton was arrested. Authorities charged him with unlawfully detaining his children and falsely reporting a crime. Though the initial forensic searches of his rural property had failed to yield conclusive results, investigators remained convinced that key evidence lay hidden. A specialist in ground-penetrating radar was brought in, and the property was methodically divided into sectors for scanning. Every square meter of land was meticulously analyzed. After 3 weeks of no results, a judge ruled that Jose must continue to be held in pretrial detention. Specially trained tracking dogs were introduced, their handlers scouring the area for signs of buried remains. Yet again, the results were disappointing. With no new leads from the property itself, search teams turned their attention outward. Helicopters buzzed overhead as divers explored wells, lakes, rivers, and remote quarries. Despite mobilizing a lot of resources, there was not a single clue to the children's whereabouts. Investigators meticulously analyzed Jose's mobile phone records and cross-referenced his movements, looking for anomalies or visits to other locations where the bodies might have been hidden. But their search proved fruitless once again. As 2011 drew to a close, the case remained at a standstill. The children had vanished without a trace. In early 2012, after months of unsuccessful efforts, authorities made the difficult decision to officially call off the search. By this time, investigators were increasingly certain that the children had never been to the park. While in prison, Jose attempted to end his life. Though his injuries were not severe, he was quickly moved to the prison infirmary. Many viewed Jose with deep suspicion, believing he was concealing the truth. Others, most notably members of his own family, stood by him, publicly declaring his innocence. They insisted he would never harm his own children and clung to the belief that perhaps someone else had taken them. Rumors of sightings abroad and whispered theories about an accomplice have added to the tension in the case. 6 months after the disappearance, the court lifted the gag order on the investigation, releasing a trove of previously sealed documents and testimonies. These included statements from individuals who had known Jose personally. Several witnesses painted a chilling portrait of a man who was not only deeply controlling but also capable of vengeful and jealous behavior. Then, in August 2012, nearly a year after the children vanished, Ruth's family, desperate for answers and unsatisfied with the original forensic conclusion, pushed for a second examination of the bone fragments recovered from the bonfire. The bones were, in fact, human. What's more, they belonged to 2 young children, likely aged between 2 and 6 years old. It not only contradicted the earlier assessment, but also exposed a devastating forensic error that had delayed justice for nearly 12 months. Investigators now had confirmation that human remains had been found at José's property, matching the profile of his missing children. Public outrage erupted across Spain. The authorities faced fierce criticism for the misstep. To get definitive answers, authorities commissioned a third forensic assessment, this time involving a team of experts from a prestigious university in Madrid. Their findings echoed the previous conclusion with even greater precision. The bone fragments were undeniably human and corresponded to the remains of 2 young children. Although the defense sought to cast doubt on the results, suggesting potential mishandling of evidence or flaws in the chain of custody, investigators stood firm. The remains had been processed by the National Forensic Laboratory, and the scientific evidence was unambiguous. Both children had perished and their bodies had been destroyed in the fire. Forensic specialists highlighted the arrangement of the bones within the ash bed, a detail that helped them reconstruct how the bodies had been positioned. While it remained impossible to confirm whether the children were alive at the time the fire was set, the overwhelming evidence pointed to a deliberate and methodical cremation. For Ruth Ortiz, the discovery was devastating. After nearly a year of anguish and unanswered questions, she could finally say goodbye to her children with the dignity they deserved. In September 2012, bolstered by the mountain of evidence and corroborating expert testimony, the court officially charged José Breton with 2 counts of aggravated murder. The charges included the aggravating circumstance of kinship. He had not only killed but had done so as a father. While awaiting trial, José was subjected to a thorough psychological evaluation. Though he exhibited signs consistent with narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, experts found no indications of mental illness severe enough to impair his judgment. He was fully aware of what he had done. Despite the evidence against him, José never admitted guilt. Investigators concluded that the murders were a premeditated act of vengeance, an attempt to punish Ruth in the cruelest way imaginable. Between September 29th and October 7th, 2011, José had taken calculated steps to prepare for the crime. Records showed that he visited a psychiatrist, ostensibly for anxiety, and acquired sedatives. He later denied ever obtaining them, but the investigation proved otherwise. It's believed these medications were used to sedate the children, either rendering them unconscious or, potentially, ending their lives before the fire. José quietly assembled the tools of his plan. He gathered firewood, bought gasoline, and mapped out a detailed sequence of actions to ensure his plan succeeded. To make sure it would work, he even conducted a test run. Once, he left his sister's children home alone for a short time to see how they would behave. On the night of October 7th, José collected his children and spent the evening at his parents' house. Early the next morning, October 8th, he drove them to his rural property, supposedly for a day of family time. Before setting out, it is believed he administered the sedatives, rendering the children unconscious in the back seat of the car. Upon arrival at the property, he attempted to contact Ruth by phone. When she didn't respond, he proceeded with the next phase of his plan without hesitation. In a secluded area behind the house, José constructed a large bonfire. He placed the children's bodies beneath an overturned iron table, designed to intensify the heat, poured gasoline over the woodpile, and lit the fire. The fire, fueled by dry wood, burned for hours. By the time he was finished, only scorched fragments remained. Around 5:30 p.m., having completed the grisly act, José left the property and drove to a location near a local park. There, he carefully laid the foundation for his alibi. He contacted both his brother and mother, claiming to be with the children at the park, reinforcing the narrative he would soon present to police. Once he felt confident in his fabricated timeline, he began executing the next part of his plan, one designed to deflect suspicion and buy time. He began calling family members, feigning panic and urging them to help in a search he knew was futile. Eventually, he phoned emergency services to report the children missing. Later that evening, he appeared at the police station to file an official report, delivering a rehearsed story that he knew was a lie from beginning to end. The trial of José Breton commenced on June 17, 2013, capturing national attention with its chilling details. His posture was rigid, his expression unreadable, and his gaze unflinching, a calm demeanor that felt disturbingly disconnected from the gravity of the accusations. As the trial began, both the prosecution and the defense presented their arguments. Jose took the stand and remained defiant. He categorically denied all allegations, portraying himself as a loving father who would have given his life for his children. In an attempt to deflect blame, he accused the authorities of negligence, insisting they had wasted valuable time focusing on him instead of actively searching for his missing children. He told the court that it was unbelievable that they still didn't know where his kids were. Ruth Ortiz recounted a marriage marred by manipulation, emotional torment, and episodes of physical abuse. Through tears, she described the toll Jose's controlling nature had taken on her and their children. She recalled Jose slapping their young son in public, an act so cruel that she had to intervene, warning him never to do it again. Forensic experts took the stand next, confirming that the remains found in the bonfire were indeed human. They emphasized that the evidence had been handled meticulously and that there was no doubt the fragments belonged to two small children. But perhaps the most valuable testimony came from a close family member, Ruth's cousin. He recounted that Jose had made chilling admissions in private, confessing on 3 separate occasions that he had killed his children. Jose had told him that he would never find them alive and that they were dead. Despite his continued denials, the prosecution remained unwavering. They argued that the evidence, physical, forensic, and testimonial, left no room for doubt. This was not a case of a father overwhelmed by circumstance. It was, they insisted, an act of calculated revenge by a man who sought to inflict the deepest pain possible on his ex-wife. After 3 days of deliberation, on July 12, 2013, the jury returned its verdict, guilty. At 40 years old, Jose Breton was convicted of murdering his 2 children in an act of premeditated cruelty. As the sentence was read aloud, he remained expressionless. For Ruth and her family, the decision brought a measure of justice, though the wounds left behind would take a lifetime to heal. 10 days later, on July 22nd, the court sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each murder, along with an additional penalty for filing a false police report. Jose's legal team quickly pursued an appeal, filing a cassation motion in March 2014 on the grounds that his right to the presumption of innocence had been violated. However, Spain's Supreme Court rejected the claim and upheld the 40-year sentence. Then, in 2015, the Provincial Court of Córdoba revised the total sentence, reducing it to 25 years. The decision sparked public debate but did little to change the situation. The case returned in October 2016. Reports emerged that Jose had attempted suicide while in prison. However, his lawyer later claimed it might have been an assault by another inmate. He was hospitalized for several weeks before returning to prison, where he continued to receive visitors. Among them was his mother, one of the few people who still believed in his innocence. Under Spanish law, inmates can request temporary release after serving a quarter of their sentence, in Jose's case, after roughly 7 years. But when he submitted such a request in 2019, it was denied. Officials cited his continued refusal to acknowledge any wrongdoing, his complete lack of remorse, and his failure to apologize or offer any gesture of restitution. Then, in 2021, after nearly a decade of silence and denial, a surprising revelation emerged. During a rehabilitation therapy session in prison, Jose is said to have confessed to the crime. In a setting surrounded by other prisoners, many of whom were also convicted of serious crimes, he confessed. According to reports, he revealed that he was incarcerated for murdering his children. Though it was too late to save anyone from the pain his actions had caused, for Ruth, the confession may have served as confirmation of what she had long believed. The case of Jose Breton resurfaced in the national consciousness once again in March 2025. A Spanish newspaper ignited renewed outrage and sorrow after publishing excerpts from a forthcoming book containing a series of prison confessions by Jose himself. Through more than 60 letters and multiple interviews conducted between 2016 and 2025, he finally told the truth. In these writings, Jose not only confessed to the murders but also offered a belated, handwritten apology to Ruth. He admitted he lacked the courage to ever face her in person or ask for forgiveness directly. For Ruth, who had spent the past decade honoring the memory of her children and tirelessly advocating for victims of domestic abuse. Although Jose remains in custody, the timing and content of his confession have raised questions. Some speculate it could be used in appeals for leniency or sentence review. Given the brutality of the crime, the calculated nature of his actions, and the years of denial, many believe he should never be granted reduced time or prison privileges. Casey Anthony was born on March 19, 1986. The woman once branded America's most hated is stepping back into the spotlight. But this time, she's not in the defendant's chair. She says she's a legal advocate now, not just for others but for herself and for her daughter. This is the same woman who was accused of killing her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Traces of chloroform were found in the trunk of her car. Her computer had searches that no parent should ever be making. And she didn't report her daughter missing for 31 days, over a month of silence while Kaylee vanished without a trace. And yet, the jury said not guilty. One juror admitted they couldn't rule out the possibility of an accident. They said that if they weren't sure a crime had been committed, how could they say she was guilty? 14 years later, Casey wasn't just back, she was taking control of the narrative. But before we dive into her return, let's take a step back in time to understand how this whole thing started. The voice on the line said it was an emergency. They found out that their granddaughter had been missing for a month. They said they had found their daughter's car that day, and it smelled like there had been a dead body in the car. 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony. Her own mother, Casey, hadn't reported her missing. Instead, for 31 days, Casey partied and hung out with friends. Casey got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, beautiful life, and there were no signs of panic or desperation. At first, Casey claimed that a nanny named Zani had kidnapped her daughter. But as investigators followed the trail, they hit a dead end, because Zani didn't exist. This was just one of many lies Casey told. Casey Marie Anthony was born in Warren, Ohio. Her parents, George and Cindy Anthony, raised her in a modest middle-class home alongside her older brother. George was a former cop turned security guard, and Cindy worked as a home care nurse. On the surface, they looked like your average suburban family. But people close to Casey noticed something early on: she lied. And not just the usual kid stuff, these were lies that served no purpose. If she got caught, she'd spin a new tale. It wasn't just a habit, it was who she was. As she got older, Casey became even more secretive. In high school, she kept her personal life completely under wraps. Her parents had no clue who she was spending time with, what she was doing, or who she was dating. She was outgoing, but deeply private. She then pretended that she had graduated from high school. Her parents planned a full-on celebration, family, friends, balloons, the whole deal, only to learn at the last minute that she hadn't even earned enough credits. She kept it hidden until it was too late to fix. Rather than retaking classes, she dropped out altogether. And the lies just kept coming. She told her family she had landed a job at Universal Studios. She even claimed to work at the Hard Rock Cafe there. Every morning, she left the house for work. Every evening, she came home, chatting about fake coworkers and made-up stories from her shift. To everyone around her, she looked like a young woman getting her life together, independent, busy, and responsible. Then in 2005, a guy named Jesse Grund entered the picture. Casey fell hard and fast. From the outside, everything looked normal, maybe even hopeful. She had a boyfriend, a job, and a sense of direction. Not long after turning 19, Casey Anthony's life took a sharp turn. She found out she was pregnant. The news threw her for a loop. She wasn't sure she wanted to keep the baby. She even told her friends that adoption might be the better choice. After all, she loved her carefree lifestyle and wasn't ready to be a mom. But instead of being upfront about it, Casey kept the pregnancy a secret. It wasn't until she was 7 months along that the truth finally came out. Even then, she insisted she was still considering adoption. But her parents, Cindy and George, weren't having it. They were furious at the thought of giving up their grandchild. In their minds, this baby was family, and that was the end of the discussion. With adoption off the table, Casey was about to become a mother whether she liked it or not. On August 9, 2005, Casey gave birth to a baby girl, Kaylee Marie Anthony. From the very beginning, Kaylee was the center of the Anthony family's world, especially for Cindy. She practically stepped into the role of mother, showering her granddaughter with love and attention. But while Kaylee became the heart of the household, Casey continued building a life wrapped in more lies. For starters, she told Jesse Grund, her boyfriend at the time, that he was Kaylee's father. And Jesse, thinking the child was his, fully stepped up. He was ready to raise Kaylee like his own. That is, until a paternity test proved otherwise. The test shattered that illusion. Jesse wasn't the father. And just like that, the question of who Kaylee's dad became a mystery, and one Casey never cleared up. She told different stories at different times. In one version, the father had died in a car crash, but no such person was ever identified. Some people guessed it was an old boyfriend, while others thought it might have been someone her family didn't even know. George and Cindy never pushed too hard for answers. All that mattered to them was Kaylee. She was family, no matter where she came from. Her brother, Lee, had no idea she was expecting until just days before Kaylee was born. And they lived under the same roof. Naturally, Lee was livid. He felt completely blindsided and betrayed. The secret hurt him so much that he even refused to go to the hospital when Casey gave birth. As life with a newborn began, Casey introduced yet another curious character into the story, the nanny. She called her Zani, short for Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zani was the ex of a guy named Jeff, an IT worker from Universal Studios. Jeff, she said, was even footing the bill for Kaylee's childcare. To George and Cindy, this setup made zero sense. Why would some random guy pay for their granddaughter's babysitter? Still, they didn't push back too hard. And weirdly enough, Kaylee had mentioned Zani and her dog a few times, which added just enough believability to keep them from digging deeper. But here's the thing, no one in the family ever met Zani. There were no visits, no phone calls, and no address. Meanwhile, Jesse Grund was still trying to make it work. Even after learning he wasn't Kaylee's father, he stayed committed. He bonded with the little girl and genuinely wanted to be there for her. He even proposed, and Casey said yes. For a brief moment, it looked like they might become a real family. However, by May 2006, cracks began to show. Jesse noticed Casey changing. She became distant, unreliable, and dishonest. Eventually, he couldn't ignore it any longer and ended the engagement. You'd think a broken engagement and single motherhood might slow her down, but not Casey. Instead, she dove headfirst into the party scene. While her parents stayed home caring for Kaylee, Casey was out living it up. Cindy and George took on the heavy lifting. They fed Kaylee, clothed her, and gave her a stable environment. Casey, on the other hand, seemed more interested in being young and wild than in being a mom. During one of her nights out, Casey met Tony, a young guy trying to make it as a DJ. Things moved fast. Within no time, they were dating, and she was spending most of her nights at his apartment, which he shared with a couple of roommates. Sometimes she even brought little Kaylee along. It was still her parents, Cindy and George, who were doing the heavy lifting, feeding Kaylee, bathing her, tucking her in at night. Honestly, they felt more like her real parents than Casey ever did. Then, on June 15, 2008, something exploded at home. A huge argument broke out. What exactly it was about, we'll never really know, but the very next morning, Casey left the house with Kaylee and claimed she was going on a work trip to Tampa. She packed bags like she was heading out of town, but, surprise, there was no trip. Instead, Casey spent the next several weeks partying like nothing had changed. She crashed at Tony's place, went clubbing, and drank almost nightly. Casey would dodge the question whenever Cindy called to check in. She would say that she was with the nanny, or that she was sleeping. But it wasn't long before things started to feel off. As her daughter remained missing, Casey's nightlife only ramped up. She entered a hot body contest at a club, posted party pics on MySpace, danced on bar counters, and even got a new tattoo that read Bella Vita, beautiful life. All while her 3-year-old was supposedly with a nanny no one had ever met. To make matters worse, Cindy and George had lent Casey their car. She didn't have one of her own, and they wanted to help her get to work. But one day, Casey drove to a check cashing store, ran out of gas, and instead of calling for help, she left the car there. Days passed, and the car sat abandoned in the lot until it was finally towed. When the tow yard called the registered owner, it was George Anthony who picked up. Confused and annoyed, he went to retrieve the vehicle. The second he opened the door, he was hit with a stench that turned his stomach. Even the lot attendant recoiled, saying it smelled like a dead body had been inside. Still rattled, George brought the car home. When Cindy caught a whiff, she panicked. They popped open the trunk and found a trash bag inside. But instead of inspecting it, they tossed it in the bin, sprayed the entire car with Febreze, and left the doors open to air out the smell. Cindy tried calling Casey over and over, but got no response. So she drove to Tony's apartment to confront her daughter face to face. The scene inside was jarring, prohibited substance paraphernalia scattered across the living room. Casey stuck to her story. Kaylee was with the nanny, Zani. But by now, Cindy had heard enough lies. She insisted Casey come home immediately. Casey, clearly annoyed and embarrassed to be dragged out in front of her boyfriend, finally agreed. But once they returned to the house, things hit a boiling point. Cindy picked up the phone and called 911. She told the dispatcher that her daughter had taken her car and abandoned it. But then she said something that changed everything. Her granddaughter had been missing for a month. As she waited for the officers to arrive, Cindy overheard Casey talking to her brother, Lee. Casey now claimed she had met the nanny, Zani, at a park to drop off Kaylee. Horrified by what she was hearing, Cindy picked up the phone and called 911 again, this time to report what she feared was a kidnapping. In a frantic voice, she told the dispatcher that her granddaughter had been missing for an entire month. That moment, the raw panic in Cindy's voice and the shocking details she spilled, was the first time the world would hear about the disappearance of Kaylee Anthony. When police arrived at the Anthony home, they immediately turned to Casey. She didn't hesitate. She claimed she knew exactly who had her daughter, the nanny, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. According to Casey, Zani had been watching Kaylee for months. She said Zani was a former co-worker from Universal Studios, part black, part Puerto Rican. And most importantly, she said Zani had taken Kaylee and vanished. Detectives asked her to take them to the last place she had seen this nanny. Casey brought them to the Sawgrass Apartments and pointed out a unit where she said Zani had lived. But when management checked the records, they found that no one had lived in that apartment since March. No sign of Zani. No proof she had ever existed. Surveillance footage didn't show Casey, Kaylee, or anyone resembling a nanny entering or exiting the building. At this point, detectives were almost certain Casey was lying. So they started digging deeper. Her so-called job at Universal Studios was another red flag. She had told her parents, her friends, and even police that she worked there. But when investigators followed up, they discovered the truth. She hadn't worked there in years. She'd been fired long ago and kept pretending. Still, they played along. They took her to Universal Studios and asked her to lead them to her office. And Casey, completely unfazed, walked straight through the employee entrance like she belonged. She waved to security, passed through the halls, and led them into the office area. For several minutes, she acted like she knew exactly what she was doing. Then she stopped, turned around, and finally admitted she didn't work there. That moment shattered what little credibility she had left. On July 16, 2008, police arrested Casey Anthony. The charges: child neglect, providing false information, and obstruction of justice. Meanwhile, Cindy sat down with detectives. She explained that when she went to pick up Casey's abandoned car from the tow yard, the smell coming from the trunk was unbearable, like something had died inside. She found a trash bag, some rotting food, and a pizza box covered in maggots. At first, she convinced herself it was just garbage gone bad. She couldn't shake the memory of her 911 call, where she had reported that the car smelled like there had been a dead body in it. Now, facing pressure, she tried to walk it back, said maybe it was just rotten pizza. But investigators weren't buying it. They brought with them hunting dogs, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition. When they reached the trunk of Casey's car, both dogs zeroed in on the same area, barking and scratching like they'd found a body. Inside, forensic experts found a small stain on the trunk liner, about the size of a toddler. And even more chilling, an extremely high level of chloroform, a chemical that can be used to knock someone unconscious. The pieces were starting to come together. But where was Kaylee? And what had really happened to her? But the horror didn't stop with the smell in the trunk or the lies about the nanny. Forensic experts found something else, something small but damning, a single strand of hair. They ran mitochondrial DNA tests, and the results narrowed it down to one of three people: Cindy, Casey, or Kaylee. This isn't just any hair. It's what's called a decomposition strip that forms when a person's body begins to decompose. The hair was long, untreated, and matched Kaylee's characteristics. Meanwhile, detectives searched the Anthony family's home computer, and what they found was jaw-dropping. Among the browser history was a chilling search for how to make chloroform. When investigators confronted Cindy about it, she threw out a strange explanation. She claimed she had been looking up chlorophyll, not chloroform, because her dogs had been eating bamboo and she wanted to know if it was toxic. Turns out, Cindy wasn't even home when the search was made. Records proved that Casey was the only person in the house at the time. She was the one who Googled it. Some believe she was in denial. But one thing's clear, Cindy was trying hard to shield Casey, even as the truth closed in. Still searching for answers, Cindy visited Casey in jail and asked her directly what Zani looked like. Casey didn't offer anything solid, just more vague answers. By now, detectives had already figured it out. Zani the nanny didn't exist. There was a real woman named Zenaida Gonzalez, but she had no connection to Casey. They'd never met. It was all a lie. One of the lead interrogators confronted Casey with brutal honesty. He warned her that this was her only chance to come clean because once the truth came out, there'd be no second opportunity. Casey remained silent for a moment, then repeated the same story, saying that was the last time she saw Kaylee and that she had dropped her off at the apartment. But the detectives weren't convinced. One of them firmly told her she was lying again. In response, Casey insisted she would never sell her daughter, saying that if she had really wanted to get rid of Kaylee, she would have left her with her parents, moved out, or even signed over custody, but she hadn't. Despite everything, despite the lies, the smell in the trunk, the DNA evidence, the Google search, no one knew where Kaylee was. Until December 11th, 2008. That morning, just under a mile from the Anthony family's home, a utility worker named Roy Kronk was doing his usual rounds when he noticed something strange in the woods. About 20 feet off the road, he saw what looked like a small skull. At first, he thought it was trash. But when he poked it with a stick, he realized it was something far more disturbing. It was the skull of a child. Roy immediately called 911. This wasn't the first time he tried to report it. He had actually contacted the police months earlier, saying the area seemed suspicious. But no one had followed up. His warning had been brushed off. This time, law enforcement took it seriously. When officers arrived, they found far more than just a skull. Scattered throughout the brush were the decomposed remains of a young child. Bones had been stuffed into a trash bag. Nearby, they found a laundry bag. But what truly struck a nerve was the baby blanket lying next to the remains. It was decorated with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, and it matched the bedding from the Anthony household. By December 19, 2008, the devastating truth was official. DNA results confirmed that the remains found in the woods belonged to Kaylee Anthony. The little girl who had vanished in July had been just minutes from home the entire time. This reignited the investigation. With evidence in hand, detectives obtained a warrant and returned to the Anthony home. What they found added weight to the case. Inside the house, investigators found a laundry bag identical to the one discovered with Kaylee's remains. These bags were only sold in sets of 2, meaning the one found in the woods must have come from the Anthony home. Then there was the blanket. The one wrapped around Kaylee's body featured Winnie the Pooh and Piglet, just like the ones decorating her bedroom. There was no denying it now. The evidence was stacking up, and it all pointed straight to Casey. Prosecutors charged Casey Anthony with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of lying to law enforcement. And they weren't holding back. They announced they'd be seeking the death penalty, convinced that Casey had intentionally killed her daughter. The trial began on May 24, 2011, and by then, the entire country was watching. In his opening statement, Baez claimed Kaylee hadn't been murdered at all. Instead, he said she had drowned in the family's backyard pool on June 16, 2008. According to him, Casey panicked, and it was her father, George Anthony, who helped cover it up. But that wasn't all. Baez went even further, accusing George of intimacy by abusing Casey when she was a child. He argued that years of trauma had turned her into a compulsive liar and that lying was her defense mechanism, not a sign of guilt. His claim, Casey didn't kill her daughter, she just never learned how to deal with pain, loss, or fear in a healthy way. The prosecution told a much darker story. They argued that Casey killed Kaylee because she wanted out of motherhood. They showed photos of Casey living it up, drinking, partying, even entering a hot body contest during the weeks her daughter was supposedly missing. Kaylee's skull had been found with duct tape on it. The prosecution said it was no accident, Kaylee had been suffocated. But here's the catch, there was no clear cause of death. One of Casey's former best friends testified that Casey never even mentioned Kaylee being missing. She acted like everything was normal, even carefree. Prosecutors also played jailhouse phone calls, cold, emotionless conversations that made Casey sound indifferent, even callous. When the closing arguments wrapped up, the prosecution urged the jury to see Casey for what she truly was, a mother who wanted her freedom more than her daughter's life. They said she was a manipulator, a habitual liar who spun stories instead of reporting her child missing. The defense fired back, pointing out that there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, and no physical evidence directly tying Casey to Kaylee's death. Then came July 5, 2011. The jury had spent just 10 hours in deliberation, and as the verdict was read aloud in a crowded Orlando courtroom, the world held its breath. The jury found the defendant not guilty of aggravated child abuse, not guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child, but guilty of providing false information to law enforcement. The verdict sent shockwaves through the nation. Some shouted in disbelief. Others sobbed in rage. Millions believed Casey had gotten away with murder. But legally, the prosecution hadn't proven how Kaylee died. And in the eyes of the law, that left room for doubt. On July 17, 2011, Casey Anthony walked out of jail a free woman, having already served her time for lying to police. The public turned on her. People screamed baby killers outside courthouses and in the streets. Despite being labeled a murderer by millions and losing her daughter under the most suspicious circumstances, Casey never once publicly broke down. There was no visible remorse. Instead, she carried on like it was just another chapter behind her. In March 2017, nearly 6 years after her acquittal, she gave her first interview to the Associated Press. She admitted to lying to the police. She acknowledged the public's hatred toward her. But the strangest part, she didn't seem to care. If anything, she looked like someone who had come to terms with being infamous and maybe even embraced it. By December 2020, she was back in the headlines again. This time, it wasn't about Kaylee. It was about business. Casey filed paperwork to launch a private investigation firm in South Florida. Then, in November 2022, she stepped back into the spotlight for a televised bombshell, Casey Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, a 3-part docuseries on Peacock. In it, she leveled shocking accusations, this time pointing the finger at her father, George Anthony. She said that the only person in the world who still mattered to her was her daughter, but she was still defending the fact that she hadn't hurt her. The headlines exploded. Casey Anthony blames her father for Kaylee's death. When approached by Inside Edition, George Anthony had little to say and muttered that he was in contact with an attorney. When asked by photographers to respond to his daughter's claims, he stayed tight-lipped. But George and Cindy Anthony didn't go completely silent. In January 2024, they appeared on an A&E true crime reality show. Both took lie detector tests while reliving Kaylee's disappearance. In one moment, George denied knowing where Kaylee was during the 6 months she was missing. In another, Cindy shocked viewers when she said she believed that Casey knew exactly what happened to their granddaughter. And just when you thought the saga might finally fade, Casey popped back up, this time on TikTok. In March 2025, she posted her first video, promoting her Substack page. She called herself a legal advocate and researcher. In the 3-minute clip, she spoke directly to viewers and said that if she was going to continue operating as a legal advocate, she needed to advocate for herself and for her daughter. Just like that, Casey Anthony was back. But not as a grieving mother. Not as someone seeking justice. As someone rebranding again, recasting herself not as the accused, but as an advocate. But through every twist and turn, one truth has never changed: a child is gone. And no one has been held responsible. Kaylee Anthony's memory still lingers like a shadow over this entire case. The public hasn't forgotten. Even the jurors who found Casey not guilty weren't spared. They received so many threats that their identities remain sealed to this day. And now, as Casey lives her life, unbothered, free, and forging a new identity online, one question still echoes: will justice ever come? Philip Grandin was born in the late 1980s and grew up in Paris, Ontario, Canada. He was known for being trusting, sociable, and active, qualities that helped him stand out among his peers. He excelled academically and received a scholarship for high school in 2003. At 17, he demonstrated his leadership skills by becoming the first participant in a competition aimed at improving motivation and social interaction skills among youth. He excelled in his assignments and won second place. The following year, he graduated from high school and was honored as the best student in the district. In 2007, he enrolled in a seminary to study theology. Eventually, he became a pastor at a Baptist church, where he met a wonderful girl named Anna Carissa. Anna was born on November 10, 1981, in Pasa, Philippines, to parents Maria and Marvin, and she grew up alongside her sister, Jano. In 1994, seeking better opportunities, her parents immigrated to Canada, settling in Toronto. Anna was a hardworking student, a wonderful daughter, and a caring person. She wanted to become a professional in her field, so she found a part-time job while studying at university. In 2006, she graduated with honors, earning a bachelor's degree in humanities, biology, and archaeology. Her family described her as a beautiful person with a kind and pure heart. Anna was very spiritual, deeply believing in God and actively participating in her church community. Those around her appreciated and loved her, seeing her as a source of inspiration and positivity. Although few knew she was battling a serious liver condition, she remained determined, often smiling and never complaining. People observed that Philip and Anna shared a very deep spiritual connection. Their friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship, and they soon fell in love. Like many Christian couples, they made vows to love and remain faithful to each other in front of their faith community. Then, they moved into a small bungalow located in Scarborough, Ontario. After 3 years of marriage, they received joyful news. Anna was pregnant and excited to welcome their long-awaited child, whom she named Jelly Dean. However, their happiness took a difficult turn. In August 2011, Anna discovered that her husband Philip, who served as a church pastor, was having an affair with her friend, who was also a member of another church. Anna faced a heartbreaking revelation when she discovered that her husband, Philip, had a concerning interest in adult content. Despite her hurt, Anna, with her kind heart, chose to forgive him because of her deep love and desire to keep their family intact. To support her husband in getting back on track, she even forgave the friend with whom he had an affair. Anna reached out to their mutual friend, Pastor Stephen, to share what had happened. After learning the details, Stephen recommended that they attend couples therapy, to which Philip agreed. It seemed that Philip was making a genuine effort to fix the problem and save his marriage. However, he was not satisfied with the advice that Stephen had given him. Stephen advised Philip to take a break from church activities, as his behavior was not consistent with his role as a spiritual advisor. Stephen wondered how he could guide others when he was still grappling with his own temptations and desires. Philip felt uncomfortable with these words, but he also realized that this was the right direction for him. Ultimately, he accepted the advice and resigned from his pastorate. During their therapy sessions, it became clear that Philip had an issue with viewing adult content. Stephen observed that he struggled to control his urges. To help him address this behavior, they agreed to install a filter on his computer to block access to inappropriate websites. Stephen encouraged Philip to prioritize rebuilding his relationship with Anna, his pregnant wife. In a positive turn of events, Philip also found a new job as a nurse at a nursing home. However, an unexpected incident happened soon after. Philip continued dating his mistress and went to great lengths to avoid being caught. Their meetings often took place in a car in secluded areas of the city. Although Anna is kind, she is not naive, and she eventually discovers Philip's infidelity. During a family therapy session with Stephen in early October 2011, Anna confronted Philip, revealing that she was aware of everything. On October 14th, just a few days later, Anna visited the hospital, complaining of dizziness, fatigue, and various other symptoms. While in the emergency room, she spoke with her sister Jano, mentioning that she had informed the doctors she felt unwell after consuming a cocktail prepared by her husband, Philip. She even questioned him about the possibility of drugs being added to the drink, but he denied it. Shortly after, toxicology tests confirmed the presence of Ativan in her blood, a medication typically not prescribed to pregnant women due to the associated health risks for both mother and child. After spending a night under observation in a medical facility, her condition improved, and she was discharged. A few days later, on October 19th, emergency services received a frantic call from Philip. He told the operator that he had just returned from a run and found his pregnant wife, Anna, submerged in the bathtub and unresponsive. The operator tried to comfort him and instructed him to drain the bathtub, then to move Anna's body to a flat surface to perform emergency CPR. Philip, who is a nurse, expressed that he didn't know how to perform this technique. He also mentioned that he couldn't lift Anna out of the bathtub because she was too slippery. When advised to use a towel under her arms to help lift her, he claimed he was unable to manage that. It was puzzling that he didn't even remove the drain plug from the bathtub to let the water out. Throughout the entire conversation, the only sound was the splashing of water. When the doctors and police arrived at the house, it became clear that Philip had not made any attempt to save Anna. She was still in the bathtub full of water. She was quickly taken to the hospital, but sadly, neither she nor her child survived. Anna, who was 29 years old, died during her 20th week of pregnancy. The autopsy report later indicated that her death was due to drowning. Philip spent several hours away before returning home the next day. He then met with Stephen to discuss funeral arrangements. The funeral took place 2 weeks later at the Jarvis Baptist Church. Many parishioners, who knew Anna as a kind and generous woman, gathered to pay their respects. Even Philip's mistress showed up, provoking outrage among the attendees. Philip made no effort to ease the tension. Those aware of his infidelity criticized him for being insincere. The attendees who questioned his sincerity had valid reasons. The death of his wife and their unborn child seemed to affect him little. In the months following the tragic loss, Philip was expected to grieve. However, by January and February 2012, rumors about his questionable behavior began to circulate, and many started to speculate about the circumstances of his wife's death. During this time, investigators thoroughly examined the case and sought evidence of Philip's involvement. They eventually concluded that he had intentionally administered a toxic substance. In June, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. A homicide detective noted that while there wasn't definitive proof to warrant his incarceration, there was enough circumstantial evidence implicating him. Despite the serious charges, the judge ruled that he could wait for his trial at his parents' farm in Brant County. People were shocked when Philip was arrested. A neighbor named Linda expressed her disbelief to journalists, saying it was hard to believe that Philip could kill his wife. She reminisced about the happy memories from the time she lived next door and became friends with their family. According to Linda, Philip and Anna treated each other with love and care. In the summer, they would visit her, enjoying lemonade and chatting in a relaxed environment. Linda was even invited to Philip's birthday celebrations, where she met his friends and family and noticed no signs of tension in their relationship. They often joked about how their lives would change with the arrival of their baby. Linda found it incredibly difficult to accept that Philip could commit such a horrific act, as he seemed joyful with his loving wife. On that tragic night, police cars arrived at the scene. Linda reported that Philip was in shock, repeatedly mentioning that they were expecting a child. Linda struggled to accept that Philip, the man who always claimed to love Anna, could be harmful to her. This marked the beginning of a slow and painful journey toward justice. Authorities believed that Philip had not only broken his marriage vows but had also plotted to eliminate Anna and their unborn son. Prosecutors aimed to demonstrate this during his first-degree murder trial, which commenced in 2014, 2 years after the tragedy. The prosecution claimed that Philip, a nurse and former pastor, had given his wife Anna a drug that functioned as a sleeping pill. While she was incapacitated, he took her to the bathtub and drowned her. His motive was to escape the marriage so he could be with his love, Elaine Florentino. During the trial, Philip pleaded not guilty, arguing that Anna had either ended her life or died in an accident. However, the evidence against him was compelling. Dr. Irving Gora testified that since Anna began seeing him in 2002, he had never prescribed her any sleeping pills, including Ativan or benzodiazepines. He also noted that on September 28, 2011, just 2 weeks before Anna's death, Philip visited him and expressed feelings of depression related to family issues. In a candid conversation, Philip admitted that he likely wouldn't choose Anna as his wife if given a chance to decide again. Irving, the obstetrician-gynecologist, pointed out that the substance found in Anna's body aligned with the prosecution's theory that Philip was involved in her death. Toxicology reports presented during the trial confirmed that lorazepam was present in her body. Additionally, a blood test conducted a few days before Anna was hospitalized revealed troubling results. During her hospitalization for suspected poisoning, Anna expressed fears that her husband was responsible and confided her concerns to her sister. The prosecution asserted that these events foreshadowed Philip's lethal actions, claiming that 3 days later, he administered a stronger dose of the illicit substance. The prosecution believed that Philip had planned the murder at least a week in advance and presented evidence collected by experts from the police computer unit. They discovered that on October 10, 2011, someone searched on a website to see if 100 milligrams of lorazepam could be lethal. On the morning of October 14th, while Anna was in the hospital emergency room, another search was conducted from Philip's device for information about escort services in Toronto at 4 a.m. approximately 4 hours after Anna made her statements. Philip was online again, this time looking for details on lorazepam to support his theory. The prosecution called Philip's former boss, Catherine Fiore, to testify about how a nurse could obtain the drug in question. Catherine, the administrator at the center where Philip worked as a nurse manager, explained that he was responsible for dispensing medications to elderly patients and monitoring the disposal of excess medications. The Toronto police reported that during their investigation of Philip's computer, they found a medication report from June 2011 that listed patients from the Unravel Center and their prescribed drugs, including lorazepam. Moreover, another piece of incriminating evidence arose during the testimony. Philip claimed that he went for a run on the evening Anna drowned and returned home at 11:45 p.m. However, the records show that the adult content filter on his computer was turned off approximately 40 minutes before he returned home, which indicates that he was lying and makes him even more suspicious. Elaine's testimony revealed that after meeting Philip, she confided in him about her issues, leading to regular communication between them. Anna, Philip's wife, was aware of this relationship. One day, she even messaged Elaine on social media to express that she knew what was happening. A particularly unsettling part of Elaine's testimony was her account of a 30-minute phone call with Philip just before he discovered Anna's body in the bathtub. She also stated that on the night of the incident, after being questioned at the police station, Philip went to see her, and they resumed their affair. Despite the evidence, the defense argued during closing statements that there was no definitive proof connecting Elaine and Philip. They proposed that Anna's choice to end her life might have stemmed from various marital issues and infidelity. After 2 days of deliberation, in January 2015, the jury declared Philip Grandine guilty of premeditated murder. In a subsequent hearing, the judge sentenced him to imprisonment, noting that his actions displayed a level of depravity unimaginable to most people. After the decision was announced, Anna's sister and mother read a statement expressing their deep grief. They described Anna as kind, generous, and conveyed how much they missed her. The pain of her untimely passing will be with them for the rest of their lives. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and prayed for Anna's soul. Sadly, Anna's family did not find relief or solace, as Philip appealed his sentence. The Supreme Court sided with him, determining that the trial court had made an error. Consequently, the jury decided to hold a new trial, where Philip would be charged with reckless homicide. This new charge meant that the prosecution could no longer argue that Philip intended to kill his wife. As a result, he was released from prison and permitted to await his new trial. The prosecution argued that Philip killed Anna to pursue an extramarital relationship and satisfy his desire for adult content. They claimed he acted recklessly by allowing Anna to enter the bathroom, knowing she was under the influence of a substance that could lead to drowning. Meanwhile, the defense contended that Anna took lorazepam on her own and caused her death either intentionally or accidentally. In the second trial, Philip was found guilty of manslaughter and was released on bail while awaiting sentencing. During her speech, Anna's mother, Maria, expressed how her world fell apart upon hearing about her daughter's death. She stated that the murder of an innocent woman and her unborn child was not just an affront to the victims, but also to God. Maria insisted on a just punishment for these terrible crimes. Anna's father, Marvin, who lives in the Philippines, revealed that Philip's actions had irrevocably changed his life. After receiving the distressing news and traveling to Canada, he fell seriously ill en route and ended up hospitalized. Marvin insisted on being discharged early so he could attend his daughter's funeral. It was later revealed that he had suffered 2 strokes in January 2020. Philip Grandine was sentenced to 15 years in prison, the same as before. The judge found that he had acted hostilely towards his wife and had given her a harmful substance to impair her ability to make decisions. The judge characterized Philip's actions as premeditated, intentional, and cruel. Surprisingly, this was not the end of the legal proceedings. Philip appealed again and was granted bail while awaiting a third trial. His lawyers presented several arguments against the conviction, claiming there was no proof that he knew his wife had taken banned substances or that she was in danger while taking a bath. They also contended that the sentence from the previous judge was excessive. Anna's family had nearly lost hope for justice. They expressed their exhaustion, noting that the man who vowed to love and cherish Anna ultimately did not keep his promise and brutally murdered her. It seemed he still failed to understand the gravity of his actions, and Anna's spirit would never find peace. In May 2002, after 10 years of struggle, Anna's loved ones finally found relief when the Ontario Supreme Court rejected the arguments made by Philip's lawyers. The judge pointed out that Philip was well aware of the risks associated with the lorazepam that Anna took that evening. Her condition before her death closely resembled that of when she was brought to the hospital showing signs of poisoning. The judge also remarked that, given his experience as a nurse, Philip should have intervened when he learned that Anna was going to take a bath. As a qualified medical worker in a nursing home, he was likely familiar with the common side effects of the medication used there. After reviewing the evidence, Philip was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Anna's sister found comfort in the thought that the killer would face consequences. She also emphasized that the appeal process had intentionally prolonged the trial and stated that the court needed to focus on addressing domestic violence, as well as protecting women and mothers from abuse. Donatella Colasanti was born on May 12, 1958, and grew up in a working-class family in Rome, Italy. She had a childhood friend named Rosaria Lopez, who was born in 1956. They lived in the same neighborhood and had similar financial backgrounds, which fostered a strong bond between them. By 1975, Rosaria was 19 and was working as a bartender to support her dream of attending college and becoming independent from her parents. She struggled to balance work and school, but she was determined to succeed. At that time, Donatella was 17 years old and still looking for a full-time job. They spent a lot of time together and had mutual friends, including John Pietro Parboni. On September 28, 1975, John invited them to a bar to relax and meet his friends. There, they met two other friends of John's, Angelo Izzo, who was 20, and Giovanni Guido, who was 19. The group enjoyed the evening, and the girls were attracted to the young men. The guys mentioned another mutual friend who couldn't make it to the gathering but suggested that Rosaria and Donatella meet him at another event planned for the following day, September 29th, at John's house. Angelo and Giovanni appeared to be nice, and both Rosaria and Donatella consented to attend the celebration. They arranged to meet Angelo and Giovanni near the Ambassador Cinema at 3:30 p.m. However, John did not join them. Angelo and Giovanni explained that John's plans had changed and that he was waiting for them at his home. Trusting them, the girls decided to go along, unaware that Giovanni took a different route, which they did not immediately notice since they were unfamiliar with the area. At around 6 to 8 p.m., they arrived at a villa named Moresca, located on the coast of Cercio in the Punta Rosa area, about 100 kilometers south of Rome. The villa belonged to their friend Andrea Gaira, who was 22 at the time. Angelo and Giovanni encouraged Rosaria and Donatella to meet their mutual friend Andrea, who owned the villa but had been unable to join them at the bar the previous day. They convinced the girls that John was swimming in the sea and would return shortly. The boys were polite and charming, which made the girls trust them. It's important to mention that all the young people came from respectable families. They also used pseudonyms, which the girls only understood much later when they found themselves in trouble. Giovanni, born on January 10, 1956, was the son of a wealthy official. At the time of this incident, he was studying architecture at a local university and living with his parents. Angelo Izzo, born on August 23, 1955, came from a middle-class family in Rome. At 13, he became involved in a social movement with extreme right-wing views and was known for his cruelty and aggression. The community feared him because he was extremely volatile. At the end of 1969, he and a friend named Andrea Gaira were expelled from their group for attempting to use the group's house to hide stolen mopeds. This incident was not the first to pose a threat to the organization. In the following years, he became increasingly ruthless, and his list of criminal activities grew significantly. He frequently led attacks on the Italian Socialist Party alongside other supporters from Rome. Additionally, he distributed illegal banned substances that he personally consumed and planned and carried out robberies of banks, jewelry stores, and post offices. The most horrifying fact for Donatella and Rosaria was that Angelo was involved in the gang abuse of multiple young girls. His method was consistent. He would meet the girls through mutual friends and lure them to a house where they were violently assaulted. In 1975, Angelo began studying medicine, but he was drawn to the criminal underworld rather than focusing on his studies. He frequently skipped school to attend parties and bars, hung out with the wrong crowd, and incited fights with rival gangs. His preferred party venues were events organized by extreme right-wing activists that featured excessive drinking, the use of banned substances, and a culture that often included the abuse and mistreatment of women. To keep the girls unaware of the danger they were in, Angelo and his friends used fake names. By 1974, Angelo had already abused 2 women with accomplices. Although he was arrested and tried, he only received a 2-year prison sentence. It was widely believed that his father's wealth and connections helped him secure such a light punishment. This sense of invincibility only made him more brutal, as he felt there were no real consequences for his actions. Andrea Guerra, born on September 21, 1953, has had a life full of ups and downs. His father, Aldo Guerra, was a wealthy construction contractor who owned a plant that produced electrical equipment. A former professional water polo player, Aldo won many medals with the Italian national team. In contrast, Andrea was more drawn to far-right political movements than to athletics or his father's profession. He became involved with these ideologies while still in high school, eventually organizing a group focused on criminal activities, which he viewed as a way to exert social influence and advance his political agenda. Starting at the age of 16, he faced serious legal troubles, including multiple incidents of hooliganism. This marked the beginning of his criminal career, heavily influenced by the notorious Marseille gang, from which he adopted the alias Jacques, after one of the gang's leaders. Jacques was known for carrying out kidnappings in Rome for the purpose of extortion. Using this pseudonym, Andrea introduced himself to new acquaintances. He was formally charged with hooliganism, and by 1972, he faced additional prosecution for armed assault causing serious injury. A year later, he and his friend Angelo committed an armed robbery, for which they were caught and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Money, connections, and a lenient justice system contributed to the troubling incident that unfolded. After only 2 years, both Angelo and Andrea were released. Rosaria and Donatella did not realize how truly dangerous they were. Despite their friendly interactions and pleasant appearances, they lured Rosaria and Donatella to a party with malicious intent. Initially, the party at the villa seemed harmless. Everyone was chatting, listening to music, and drinking. However, as Angelo and Giovanni drank heavily and used banned substances, they became erratic and aggressive. Initially, Rosaria and Donatella considered the boys' annoying flirtations to be just a joke. However, as the situation became more serious, they realized they were being threatened and had no way out. They firmly denied having any intimate relations with the men and asked to go home. Then one of the criminals pulled a gun on them, introduced himself as a member of a criminal gang in Marseille, and stated that the leader of the gang had ordered their kidnapping. At this point, Rosaria and Donatella's spirits were broken, and the real nightmare began. They were subjected to torture and multiple abuses by Giovanni and Angelo. They were beaten and tormented at gunpoint, with the owner of the villa, Andrea, joining in on the violence. This horrifying situation continued for approximately 36 hours. Rosaria and Donatella were administered a banned substance, and Rosaria was taken to the upstairs bathroom, where she endured another brutal beating. After that, they began to drown her until she lost consciousness. They attacked Donatella several times, rendering her unconscious but failing to kill her. Instead, they mocked her. When Rosaria died, the criminals clearly intended to eliminate her as well. However, they eventually lost interest, became distracted, and left her unconscious in the living room. Once she was conscious again, she quickly decided to take the opportunity to call for help. She started dialing the emergency number, but just as she heard the beeping through the receiver, one of the criminals entered the room. Before she could say anything, she was struck on the head with a heavy object, an iron kettle. She collapsed, bleeding and displaying no further signs of life. The criminals then decided to dispose of the bodies. They wrapped Rosaria and Donatella in towels and blankets, placed them in bags, and transported them to a white Fiat parked outside the villa. They stuffed the bodies into the trunk and then got into the car, driving toward Rome. It was evident that they felt no remorse as they laughed and joked about having 2 dead bodies in the car during the drive. The group finally reached Giovanni's house in the city. Feeling hungry, they chose to stop for dinner at a restaurant before dealing with the bodies. They left the car parked on the street and, upon entering the restaurant, encountered 2 other men associated with a different group. A fight erupted, instigated by the criminals, who acted as if nothing was amiss despite having 2 bodies in the trunk. Little did they know that Donatella was alive all along. After being struck on the head, she pretended to be dead to avoid further harm, and it worked. Once she realized the criminals had left the car, she waited a while to ensure they were gone. Then, she began to scream and thrash about in the trunk. Despite her injuries and intense pain, she summoned her last ounce of strength to fight for her life. It was around 11 p.m., and the streets were mostly empty. The likelihood of anyone hearing her cries for help was slim, but fortunately, a nearby security guard noticed noise coming from the trunk of a car. An elderly bystander, who saw blood dripping from the vehicle, quickly approached a police car parked nearby. This timely intervention proved to be crucial for Donatella, as the young assailants were preparing to leave. The police communicated via radio to report the situation. At that moment, a journalist interested in the case rushed to the scene. The journalist arrived just as law enforcement was trying to open the trunk, from which screams could still be heard. Once the trunk was finally opened, they discovered a bloody, beaten young woman. She was naked and badly injured, lying beside the body of her deceased friend, Rosaria. Medical assessments later revealed that Donatella had sustained multiple serious injuries, including a severe head injury from a blow with a metal rod and a broken nose. The trauma she suffered in the trunk of the car, being with her dead friend, left her with deep psychological scars. Donatella struggled for a long time to cope with the aftermath, but could never fully heal. During her time in the hospital, she lived in constant fear that the criminals would return to eliminate her as a witness. Sleep eluded her, and even after being discharged, her fear of retaliation from the attackers lingered. Meanwhile, Giovanni, noticing a crowd gathering around his car, attempted to flee but was caught. Angelo was also apprehended, while Andrea received a warning and managed to escape. He was placed on the wanted list. The next day, the police located Andrea's relatives, who were washing blood from their home, indicating that they were trying to cover for her. They provided no information to the police, leading to speculation that he had warned them about the situation and sought their help to hide. Unfortunately, their cover-up was effective. They prolonged the time, and the traces were erased. Angelo and Giovanni were arrested and questioned about the attack on Rosaria and Donatella, but they continually denied any wrongdoing. After several months, Andrea was still at large, and all attempts to find him had been unsuccessful. Suddenly, his friends received a letter from him in which he claimed that, thanks to their good behavior, they would soon be released because he had made an agreement with the mafia. He also threatened that Donatella would die if she decided to testify against them in court. This increased pressure on Donatella, but she refused to be silenced. She was determined to avenge Rosaria's death and her own suffering. Donatella miraculously escaped and realized that until the criminals were caught, she wouldn't be able to live in peace, fearing their return. Inspired by Donatella's testimony, the Carabinieri managed to piece together the incident of the crime, which had been carried out by a group of young people in the countryside. However, Donatella's lawyer is concerned that criminals may evade punishment due to the influence of their parents. To ensure maximum visibility for the case, a group of volunteers was formed, led by Donatella's lawyer, to support the fight against the criminals. Several feminist organizations attended the trial to show their support. Thanks to their efforts and Donatella's bravery, on July 29th, all 3 accused were convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Angelo, Izzo, and Giovanni received life sentences without the possibility of parole, while Andrea Gaira remained at large. For a long time, Andrea was not caught, making Donatella's fear grow. She was terrified of his possible return and the revenge he might seek, since he was still at large. The police were desperate to find him but were unsuccessful. Years passed, during which Donatella lived in constant fear and tried to influence law enforcement efforts. The Carabinieri discovered that Andrea had fled to Spain shortly after the murder on June 26, 1976. He joined the Spanish Legion under a fake name, Massimo Testa Andres, claiming to have been born in Rome in 1955 and even presented counterfeit documents. While serving, Andrea frequently changed bases and became heavily involved in the use and distribution of banned substances, leading to a serious addiction. The effects of his banned substance use became increasingly apparent. On May 28, 1980, he was imprisoned for 6 months for offenses related to banned substances. In 1982, he was assigned to the Special Forces in Malaga and later transferred to Melilla, where he faced several repercussions for the use and possession of banned substances. On July 21, 1993, Andrea began experiencing health issues and was hospitalized, where doctors diagnosed him with a brain tumor. Due to his deteriorating mental health and various physical ailments, he was discharged into the reserves. Without a passport, Andrea moved to the city where he had been last stationed, living with his girlfriend, who owned a small shop. However, he quickly spent all the money he had earned during his service and continued to abuse banned substances. Tragically, he died from an overdose on September 2, 1994. His body was discovered a week later, on September 9th, after he had moved out from his girlfriend's place. In 2005, when the disturbing details of Andrea's life were uncovered, the Rome prosecutor's office requested the exhumation of his body. This request was approved on November 14th of that year. Andrea's remains were exhumed in the presence of local investigators, and his femur was sent to Rome for analysis. On November 26th, a DNA test confirmed his identity, but the results were questionable because the test had been conducted by a former student who was a relative of Andrea's mother. This led Donatella to believe that the bone might belong to one of Andrea's relatives and that Andrea himself could still be alive, potentially committing more crimes in Rome or elsewhere. Despite the attempts to explain the situation to her, she remained traumatized and wanted to ensure her safety. To clarify any doubts, in January 2016, the Rome prosecutor's office reopened the investigation and exhumed the body again to perform a more thorough DNA test using advanced techniques from a different laboratory. In June 2016, the results confirmed the earlier analysis of the femur, proving that Andrea had indeed died and no longer posed a threat to her. Angelo and Giovanni led tumultuous lives. In January 1977, while serving prison sentences, they attempted to escape by taking a prison guard hostage. Fortunately, their escape plan was unsuccessful. In January 1986, Angelo made another escape attempt from a different correctional facility. Despite these violations, on August 25, 1993, he benefited from a reduction in the severity of his detention, which allowed him a temporary leave from prison. Instead of returning, he fled to France but was captured in Paris on September 15 and extradited back to Italy. These incidents instilled intense fear in Donatella. She had survived an earlier attack but remained haunted by the possibility of being harmed again. In December 2004, Angelo Izzo was granted partial freedom from Campobasso prison to work at the Città Futura cooperative, but he still did not change his way of life. Just 5 months later, on April 28, 2005, he murdered 14-year-old Valentina Majorano and her mother, 50-year-old Maria Carmela. They are the wife and daughter of his former cellmate, Giovanni Majorano. He attacked the mother first and then turned to her daughter. Like 30 years earlier, Angelo disposed of their bodies by packing them in bags, but this time he learned from past mistakes and buried the victims immediately, preventing any chance of their bodies being discovered. On April 30th, the crime was resolved after an accomplice, Luca Palaia, confessed. As a result, the main perpetrator, Angelo, received only a 3-year prison sentence. Investigators initially believed the crime was motivated by abuse since Valentina was found naked. However, Angelo claimed that his motive was robbery, stating that he attacked Maria after she refused to give him her valuables and subsequently eliminated Valentina as a witness. Later, detectives speculated that the attack on Maria and Valentina was motivated by revenge against Angelo's former cellmate, Luca, who was associated with a rival group. On January 12, 2007, Angelo was sentenced to life imprisonment for the double murder. The families of Maria and Valentina felt the justice system was at fault for allowing such a dangerous individual to roam free, as Angelo was clearly unrehabilitated. They argued that the tragic deaths of Maria and Valentina could have been avoided if he had remained in prison. The families later appealed to the European Court of Human Rights. On December 15, 2009, the court found Italy guilty of violating Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights by allowing Angelo, a life-sentenced prisoner, to have semi-freedom. The Strasbourg court determined that this decision directly led to the deaths of Maria Carmela and Valentina Majorano, who were killed by Angelo while he was at large. The judge emphasized that the state has a duty to protect the right to life, which includes taking necessary precautions to safeguard individuals in its care. The court concluded that granting semi-freedom to such a dangerous criminal, along with a lack of supervision, directly contributed to the deaths. As a result, the Italian authorities were obligated to compensate their families with €45,000 for moral damages. Despite his violent actions, some individuals romanticized Angelo's image. For instance, in November 2009, a journalist who had closely followed his criminal activities expressed a desire to marry him and advocated for his release. She believed in his innocence and was committed to proving it. In March 2010, they formed a relationship while he was in prison, but it ended about a year later. In an attempt to have his sentence reduced, Angelo testified before a commission combating the mafia, claiming to know about a girl named Rossella Corazon who disappeared at age 17 on August 21, 1975. He alleged that she had captured the attention of a Masonic lodge due to her innocence and charm and was used as a sacrifice in initiation ceremonies of the Red Rose Cross Brotherhood. He stated that he last saw her after a Masonic ritual when she was released from the hall. Angelo was convinced her body could be found in the forest, but searches yielded nothing, and no one believed his claims. While in prison, Giovanni Guido wrote several manuscripts, including a book titled Decameron 1975. This book resembles the tragic incident involving 3 criminals and 2 girls, Donatella and Rosaria, one of whom did not survive the attack. On October 28, 1980, Giovanni's prison sentence was reduced to 30 years following a successful appeal. This reduction was granted after he expressed remorse and paid 100 million lire in compensation to Rosaria and Donatella's families. In January 1981, Giovanni escaped from prison and fled to Buenos Aires but was quickly recognized. Almost 2 years later, he was captured and awaited extradition. However, due to hepatitis contracted during his previous imprisonment, he was placed in a medical facility. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he escaped from the hospital on April 17, 1985, before his extradition could take place. He was discovered again in Panama in the summer of 1994, where he started a new life as a used car salesman. When authorities found him, he was extradited back to Italy. Surprisingly, on April 11, 2008, his sentence was changed to community service after he had served 14 years in prison. During his time behind bars, he earned a degree in foreign languages and literature. His sentence officially ended on August 25, 2009, following a pardon. This significant reduction in his sentence sparked outrage, especially from Rosaria Lopez's sister, who felt that the punishment for the brutal killer was not strict enough. She believed that the years Giovanni spent abroad after his escape were overlooked in the decision-making process. Despite objections, requests to reconsider the pardon were denied. The villa where the crime occurred is now unoccupied. 25 years later, Andrea's mother sold it to an elderly woman. The villa then passed to her son, who attempted to convert it, which was known as a house of horrors, into a studio but ultimately abandoned the project. The villa now stands neglected, with rusted gates and overgrown vegetation nearly engulfing the area where 17-year-old Donatella was released. A memorial plaque and red benches symbolizing the fight against gender violence were placed there during that time. Amidst these changes, the story of survivor Donatella Colasanti remains heart-wrenching. Despite being a minor, she miraculously survived the assault by 3 attackers but lived in fear for the rest of her life. Nevertheless, she continued to fight for justice and passed away from breast cancer on December 30th, 2005, at the age of 47. Her last message was a call to action: let's fight for the truth. In 2020, her former home was restored and transformed into a center dedicated to combating violence in Rome. In early June 2014, road maintenance crews were cutting grass along a highway in Walworth County. It was a routine job until a worker noticed 2 suitcases, one purple and one black, abandoned in the bushes on the side of the road. Immediately suspicious, they were further disturbed by a strong odor and a swarm of flies surrounding the suitcases. A police officer was called to the scene. Upon his arrival, he opened the purple suitcase and made a grisly discovery: the body of a woman inside a black trash bag. The black suitcase also contained the body of another woman. One of the women was in an advanced state of decomposition, with her hands tied behind her back with rope. The other woman was naked and had a rope necklace around her neck. Both had clearly been dead for a long time. The area was quickly sealed off, and a thorough investigation began. A bulletin was issued across the Midwest revealing that 2 unidentified female victims had been discovered. This announcement sparked a surge of missing persons reports from various departments in the region. Authorities faced the daunting task of sorting through numerous names and details in hopes of identifying the victims. Investigators scrutinized the ropes that bound the women, seeking any trace evidence or DNA that could lead to the perpetrator. Within a day, they successfully identified one victim by her distinctive tattoos: Laura Simonson, a 37-year-old mother from Farmington, Minnesota, who had been reported missing on November 22, 2013. The police tracked Laura's last known movements to the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Hotel staff confirmed she stayed there on November 2nd and 3rd. Security footage showed that she was accompanied by a man who checked in with her, paid in cash, and refused to provide his real name. The following day, he was seen leaving alone, pushing a trolley full of bags. Laura has not been seen since. As of mid-January 2014, a tip identified a man named Stephen Zielik as a person who might have been with Laura. The detective assigned to the case contacted the West Allis police to investigate Stephen's home, but they found no evidence of Laura. Weeks later, after Stephen did not respond to a letter, the FBI and the Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation visited his residence. He admitted that he was in Rochester with Laura but claimed they had broken up afterwards. He denied having any romantic relationship with her and insisted that he had not seen her since. In April 2014, just weeks before Laura's body was discovered, a concerning post appeared on a classified advertisement website. It accused Stephen of being an abuser who had imprisoned a woman named Laura Simonson. The post claimed she was held naked, shackled, and abused, urging people to harass Stephen to pressure him for her release. The post included his phone number and email, as well as a link to an illegal website where he allegedly used the username Randcuffs. At the time, the author of the post remained unknown, but it became terrifyingly haunting when Laura's remains were found. The situation worsened as investigators needed to identify a second victim known only as Jane Doe. She was estimated to be between 15 and 35 years old, weighing about 120 to 140 pounds. She had an overbite, 2 piercings in each ear, and a small heart tattoo on her lower left pelvis. To aid in her identification, a forensic sketch was released. The sketch eventually reached the friends and family of Jenny Gomez in Oregon, who believed it resembled her. Dental records from a foster parent confirmed her identity. Jenny was 19 years old and a student from Cottage Grove, Oregon. Her friends described her as cheerful and full of life. She had a young son but had lost custody. Jenny had a challenging upbringing, spending time in multiple foster homes. She graduated from an alternative high school with honors and earned a college scholarship. Those who knew her remembered her as resilient and optimistic. However, her family and friends did not report her missing, as they believed she was simply getting on with her life. Now, detectives need to determine the cause of Jenny's death and find out who was responsible. They discovered that both Laura and Jenny had joined the same illegal website and had communicated with the same man, Steven Zielik. Laura had once messaged him, saying that if he ever killed her, no one would find her. Investigators traced his email to an apartment in West Allis, where they monitored him and tracked his vehicle. When he came home from work, the police were waiting. He claimed he had never met Laura in person but agreed to provide a DNA sample. Steven admitted to having had an interest in illegal websites since he was 19, insisting it had been a part of his life for years. However, the investigators suspected something more. His online identity, connections with both Laura and Jenny, along with emerging physical evidence, painted a much more sinister picture. In a dark corner of the internet, Steven has a very disturbing profile. His online presence is clear. He is looking for a permanent slave, someone who is willing to give up all their autonomy. He outlined his vision of a submissive as someone who should be restrained with ropes, hooded, caged, or led by a collar and leash, with limits on their freedom. For him, this is more than a hobby, it is a lifestyle, and he is determined to find someone to share it with. Steven believed he had effectively erased his digital footprint, but despite his efforts, evidence still existed. His computer had software designed to wipe data continuously, and it logged numerous deletions. Yet authorities were able to access Laura's laptop, which contained copies of their online conversations. More damaging was the hotel surveillance footage that showed Steven checking in with Laura, providing clear proof of their meeting. However, circumstantial evidence alone couldn't guarantee a conviction. Detectives needed undeniable proof linking him to the two deceased women, Laura and Jenny. The turning point came when forensic analysis of the rope used to bind Jenny identified DNA that matched Steven. This crucial evidence led the police to obtain a search warrant for his apartment in West Allis. What they discovered inside was alarming. The apartment was dirty, but they found cleaning supplies, bleach, and tools typically used to destroy evidence. Additionally, they uncovered one of the suitcases used to transport the bodies, as well as bondage gear and an authentic police badge. Steven had previously served as a police officer. He worked with the West Allis Police Department from 1989 until his resignation in 2001, but his history was problematic. Internal affairs records showed alarming behaviors, including misusing his position, stalking women while on duty, and accessing confidential information for personal reasons. In total, he faced 10 disciplinary actions during his career, with accusations ranging from intimidation to the inappropriate use of sensitive police databases. A recorded conversation between Steven and his police chief reveals a tense exchange about his behavior while on duty. The chief raised concerns about the appropriateness of his repeated interactions with women. Steven defended himself, saying his actions were appropriate and described them as very normal. However, complaints from local businesses and individuals suggested otherwise. In May 2001, a dancer accused him of offering $300 for a private show. She agreed to go to his home, but once there, she claimed she heard the sound of handcuffs. Fearing what might happen next, she attempted to escape, but Steven allegedly threw her to the ground and choked her. She eventually broke free and ran to a neighbor's house, shouting for help, fearing for her life. Steven maintained that she was trying to rob him. A few months later, he resigned from the police force without facing any disciplinary action, allowing him to keep a clean record and later obtain a private security license. Jamie, a former roommate who had briefly dated Steven before they became friends, later shared disturbing information. She discovered a large wire cage in his basement along with abuse equipment. She revealed that he had confided in her about keeping a woman imprisoned in that cage for 7 years while he was still working as a police officer. Concerned for her own safety and that of her children, Jamie waited until he left for work, then packed her belongings, rented a U-Haul, and left without looking back. In January, while Steven was being questioned about Laura, he posted on another forum expressing his desire to find a master. He expressed a desire to be enslaved, caged, and reduced to an animal-like existence. He envisioned an ideal life of captivity, whether on a farm or in a prison cell. As bizarre as his online activity was, few could have predicted what would happen next. On June 25th, Shortly after 8 a.m., authorities from Walworth County arrived at his apartment complex in West Allis. Armed officers stormed the unit, using shields and a battering ram. Witnesses were shocked as officers rushed in and later emerged with evidence bags and Stephen's refrigerator. Now 52, Stephen was arrested on 2 counts of concealing a corpse. His seemingly quiet life as a security guard had been a facade. Despite working at a security company since 2007, his colleagues describe him as an oddball. On the very day Stephen disposed of the bodies, he was active online. The district attorney revealed that he had messaged a woman named Petra that same day, expressing a desire to keep her in complete captivity and indicating that he was ready to plan her dehumanization. As more evidence came to light, a clearer picture of Stephen emerged. Documents detailing his history spanned hundreds of pages, from his initial police department application in 1989 to his resignation letter in 2001. In the early years of his police career, Stephen was evaluated as professional, respectful, and reliable. However, as the late 1990s transitioned into the early 2000s, troubling behavior began to surface, accompanied by a growing number of complaints. Several women came forward, claiming that Stephen had harassed and followed them while on duty. Prosecutors alleged that his relationship with Jenny began when she was 16 and in the foster care system. They first connected on a bondage-themed website. Their communication stopped and then resumed after she turned 18. He persuaded her to move in with him in Wisconsin, urging her to erase her social media accounts and cut ties with her friends. In August 2012, Jenny took a one-way flight to Milwaukee, telling her family she was going to welding school. Stephen picked her up at the airport, and they checked into a hotel in Kenosha. He later told the police that they participated in breath play, a dangerous activity that involves restricting breathing. He claimed that during one session, he lost control and accidentally strangled her while she was tied up and blindfolded. Stephen's lawyer argued that after this incident, he panicked. He placed Jenny's body in a suitcase and brought it back to his apartment, where he stored it in his refrigerator. Jenny's remains stayed there for over a year. As the body decomposed, the refrigerator could no longer be closed, so he taped it shut. After his arrest, he confessed to being involved in Jenny's death, but police stated they still needed to determine whether it constituted homicide. Jenny, from Cottage Grove, Oregon, had told her family in late 2012 that she was moving to protect them, which is why they never filed a missing person report. Friends described her as kind-hearted and well-intentioned. However, when authorities questioned Stephen, he could not remember her name. Jenny's body remained in the refrigerator until Laura entered the picture. Like Jenny, Laura met Stephen online. They arranged to meet at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Once again, Stephen encouraged her to delete her social media accounts, sell her car, and sever connections with others. According to his account, Laura also died during a breath control session. He claimed it was another accident. Laura was found naked, with a gag in her mouth and a collar around her neck. After Laura died, Stephen placed both women's bodies into suitcases, loaded them into his trunk, and drove to a remote area on a road in Geneva, Wisconsin, where he left them near a ditch. Stephen later admitted that he decided it was time to dispose of them. Strangely, the location where Stephen discarded the suitcases was close to the local police station. Prosecutors argued that this was not a coincidence, suggesting he chose that spot out of carelessness or arrogance. Despite the horrific nature of the situation, Stephen's defense team presented a different viewpoint. They contended that the deaths were accidental, not criminal, and claimed that by leaving the suitcases in the open, he was not attempting to hide anything. They argued that Stephen was simply trying to dispose of the bodies, not conceal them. Stephen faced 2 counts of hiding a corpse. His defense attorney requested a $50,000 bond, highlighting his college education and community connections, but the judge did not agree. Bail was set at $1 million, as the judge deemed it necessary for public safety and to prevent Stephen from fleeing. Currently, the accusations only pertain to the concealment of a body. However, as more evidence emerges, particularly the similarities between the deaths of the 2 women, Laura and Jenny, the situation may change. On Tuesday, August 5th, Stephen was officially charged with first-degree intentional homicide and concealing a corpse related to the death of Jenny. These charges marked a significant moment in a case already filled with distressing details. Since Laura died in Minnesota, her case was being processed there and was put on hold until the Wisconsin trial concluded. The Kenosha County District Attorney pointed out that Laura's death was crucial in revealing the truth about both murders. Stephen quickly became a suspect in her disappearance, especially after security footage showed him and Laura checking into a hotel together. These incidents were not mere accidents or misunderstandings. Laura's family described her as a vulnerable person who had battled mental health issues. Her father shared that she had been posting escort advertisements on Craigslist, and in 2010, her children were placed in his care. The family had already faced a devastating tragedy when Laura's 13-year-old twin daughters, who had disabilities, died in June 2013. Prosecutors planned to argue that the murders were premeditated. They declared that Stephen intentionally targeted isolated or vulnerable women, encouraging them to cut off relationships both on social media and in person, and then employed methods of killing that left little forensic evidence. An unexpected turn occurred when jury selection was about to start, as Stephen reached a plea agreement. In a surprising move, he pleaded guilty to killing 19-year-old Jenny Gomez. As a result of the plea deal, Stephen, then 54, faced a possible 75-year prison sentence, which the state intended to pursue to ensure he spent the rest of his life in prison. The original charge of first-degree intentional homicide was reduced, and he pleaded guilty to first-degree reckless homicide with a dangerous weapon, the rope used in Jenny's death, and to concealing her body. In total, he was sentenced to 35 years in prison, along with 10 years of supervised release. An additional 5 years were added concurrently for the charge of concealing a corpse. During sentencing, Stephen appeared emotionally detached. He did make a brief apology, describing Jenny as a good person, but the prosecution depicted him as a predator who intentionally targeted vulnerable women and abused their trust. The district attorney expressed satisfaction with the sentence, believing it would enhance public safety. Stephen's defense lawyer, Jonathan Smith, urged the judge to consider that Laura's death occurred later and should not influence Jenny's case, but the judge disagreed. Next came the trial for the murder of Laura Simonson. Now 55 years old, Stephen pleaded guilty to second-degree murder with intent in her death and received a 25-year prison sentence. Although the judge acknowledged Stephen's cooperation, she still believed that the sentence was reasonable. She stated that Stephen would have to serve enough time in prison to prevent other victims from suffering at his hands. Some of Laura's family members sought a harsher sentence. Her daughter described him as a monster and lamented that maybe while he rots in a cell, he would understand the pain he caused. Since the two sentences will be served consecutively, Stephen will spend the rest of his life in prison. The conclusion of this story is profoundly tragic. Both Laura and Jenny were mothers who faced unimaginable hardships and ultimately became victims of a man who exploited their vulnerabilities. David Brown was born in 1952 in Phoenix, Arizona, as the sixth of 8 children. His father, Arthur, worked as a mechanic and took on extra shifts to support the large family. His mother, Manuela, was a housewife who managed the household tasks and took care of the children. David later described her as selfish, strict, and domineering, often showing cruelty towards him, his siblings, and her husband. Manuela's strong personality frequently overshadowed her quiet and calm husband, Arthur, who struggled to assert himself. David had a strained relationship with his mother, Manuela. As he grew up, he sought revenge on her by mocking her Latin American background and expressing contempt for her culture. He refused to accept her customs and frequently criticized her. Despite being bright and intelligent, David struggled in school due to various illnesses and eventually became a hypochondriac, believing he had cancer since his teenage years. He held very high expectations of others, yet his close friends noted that he had low self-esteem. David enjoyed the company of people with serious health issues, as it made him feel better about himself. After dropping out of school in the 8th grade, he started working to support himself and showed little interest in family connections, only reaching out to his siblings when he needed something. His primary interests became women and money. The first girl David dated long-term was Brenda Sands. They met when they were 15 and began living together. Brenda also had family problems and frequently ran away from her parents, which brought her and David very close. When they were 16, they decided to run away together. They worked odd jobs and lived in poverty. Brenda held various part-time jobs and became the breadwinner, while David sold goods, often fell ill, and was on a variety of medications, including prescription drugs. He believed he had a range of illnesses, from allergies and bronchitis to cancer. At 17, Brenda became pregnant. Despite their young age, they loved each other and wished to get married, but they needed their parents' permission. On July 3, 1970, they got married, and just a few months later, their daughter Cinnamon was born. Their family then moved to Long Beach, California, where David took a special interest in their child, Cinnamon. Eventually, they sought state assistance since they couldn't support themselves or their child. Through a state program, David became eligible for free education, which he decided to pursue. In 1971, he enrolled in university to study statistical data processing with a focus on computer work. He quickly developed a strong interest in the subject and excelled in his studies, becoming a skilled professional. This new path allowed him not only to support his family but also to begin building a successful career. Cinnamon was very close to her father, David, who spoiled and adored her. Meanwhile, Brenda was suffering in her relationship, as David was a controlling and abusive partner. He restricted Brenda's freedom, not allowing her to drive or be away from him for long, except when she went to work to earn money. Brenda described David as having an obsession with other women. His pattern was always the same. He would initially fall in love, become possessive, exert control, and then ultimately abandon the woman for someone younger. After tiring of Brenda, David considered divorce and started a relationship with Laura, who was 3 years younger. One day, he came home and announced his desire for a divorce, handing Brenda the papers to sign. He intended to seek full custody of Cinnamon. Brenda refused to sign, believing that David's new relationship would soon fizzle out and that he would return to the family. However, David's anger over her refusal made him even more abusive and controlling. He physically attacked her multiple times, even strangling her while she slept. This violence prompted Brenda to leave with their daughter. In a desperate act, David confronted her at work, holding a weapon to his head and threatening to end his life. Despite this, Brenda remained resolute. After the divorce, Brenda was granted custody of their children, partly due to David's inappropriate behavior. This situation left David in a deep depression, and he even contemplated ending his life, but he eventually started to recover. David married Laura when she was just 19 and he was 23. Their marriage lasted about 4 years before issues arose again. Frustrated, David sought a new hobby and decided to get a divorce, after which he met Linda Bailey and her family. The Bailey sisters, PM and Linda, had a challenging upbringing. Their mother struggled with alcoholism and had 11 children, 7 of whom were still teenagers or younger. They lived in difficult financial circumstances and couldn't even afford outings like a trip to McDonald's. After meeting Linda's family, David decided to help them. He offered to pay them to clean his house, claiming he had cancer and could no longer handle household chores on his own. He made this proposal to PM and her younger sister Linda, who were eager to earn some extra money. During this time, David formed a secret relationship with PM. As a skilled manipulator, he targeted vulnerable individuals and portrayed himself as their hero. This behavior was consistent. He would also test the loyalty of those who were close to him, including his daughter, Cinnamon. She stole things from other cars at night to win her father's love. She had no idea that her father would eventually test her loyalty in a much crueler way. David's relationship with PM lasted 2 years before it ended. He then began openly dating her younger sister, Linda, who was only 15 at the time. Despite their significant age difference, their relationship progressed. By the time she turned 17, she had convinced her mother to allow them to marry. They wed in Las Vegas in 1979 when David was 27. So strange, just a month after their marriage, he kicked her out, claiming she was too immature. During this time, David switched jobs and started earning significantly more money. He spent this money on women, especially the daughters of the Bailey family, who were easily impressed by even small gifts. Later, David decided to change careers again and launched his own company specializing in data recovery from damaged computers. He developed a unique method that he kept secret, which proved to be very effective. His business flourished, and his techniques were even used for data recovery after serious incidents, such as fires or natural disasters, involving large corporations. During this period, David divorced Linda, began a new relationship, and remarried quickly. However, his new wife had 2 children, leading to another divorce. Meanwhile, he rekindled his relationship with Linda. Interestingly, before marrying Linda for the first time, he told her family that he had overcome cancer, which earned him their support. In 1981, he rented a larger house, remarried Linda, and moved there with her and her younger sister, Patty, who was 5 years younger. It's important to note that Patty had always looked up to David, who seemed kind and generous, often fulfilling her small wishes. Although they met when she was just 8 years old, Patty felt jealous of her sisters in relation to David. Now, at 15, she was developing feelings for him, and David began to notice her affection, taking advantage of the situation by frequently looking into her bedroom and suggesting that her feelings were normal. Throughout her childhood, Patty was abused by her brother, while her mother, who struggled with alcoholism, remained indifferent to the situation. When Patty moved into David's house, she experienced having her own room and a closet full of clothes for the first time, without needing to share. Meanwhile, Cinnamon's relationship with her father, David, is maintained, although she does not visit him as often as she would like. She lived with her mother, Brenda, and had a good relationship with her young stepmother, Linda, who was only 21 at the time. During this period, David began to show increasing dissatisfaction with his marriage to Linda. Despite having a daughter named Crystal, who was born in 1983, he began to turn Patty against her sister, Linda. He claimed that Linda wanted to take his business from him. Within a few months, he convinced Patty that Linda had malicious intentions, to the point that she was genuinely afraid David might be harmed so that Linda could take control of the business. Meanwhile, Cinnamon's relationship with her mother, Brenda, deteriorated, leading to conflicts as she wanted to spend more time with her father, David. By the end of summer in 1984, she decided to move in with David and enroll in a local school. From the very beginning, David expressed his concerns about Linda's supposed evil intentions, successfully convincing both Patty and Cinnamon of this narrative. He even suggested that they needed to escape the city to avoid being harmed. Everyone saw him as a hero, which made them fearful of the situation. Following this, he began discussing with them how to eliminate Linda. Curiously, divorce was never considered, and they openly talked about the idea of killing her. The group brainstormed options and concluded that using a weapon was the best method. By the end of 1984, they made their first attempt. David gives Patty a weapon and instructs Patty to kill Linda while she sleeps, but Patty cannot bring herself to do it. David had taken out multiple life insurance policies on Linda, totaling around $800,000, which would be equivalent to approximately $2.5 million today. When David realized that Patty wouldn't be able to complete the job, he decided to manipulate his daughter, Cinnamon, coercing her into action. He told her that if Linda didn't die, he would have to run away and hide for the rest of his life, which meant Cinnamon would never see him again. A couple of days later, Cinnamon stood over Linda, holding a weapon. She placed a pillow on Linda's head to muffle the sound and then pulled the trigger. The gun got stuck in the fabric after the shot. Afraid, Cinnamon threw the weapon down and returned to the room where she was staying with baby Crystal. They went back to the bedroom and found Linda wounded and crying on the bed, asking for help and not understanding who had harmed her. Cinnamon had narrowly missed her target. The weapon was left on the bed, stuck in the torn fabric of the pillow. Patty took the weapon and returned it to Cinnamon, encouraging her to complete what she had begun. Another shot echoed through the room. Around 3:30 a.m., the police station received an emergency call from a distressed man named David. He was crying and urgently requested help for his wife. When the police arrived, he immediately expressed his belief that his wife was attacked. He claimed that he had left the house to go to the store, and during his absence, a tragic event unfolded. Surprisingly, he accused his daughter of the act. David's wife, Linda, was found alive but had sustained 2 attack wounds to the head. She died shortly after in front of the police, and the medical examiner concluded that she could not have been saved. David was very emotional, crying profusely and appearing more unwell than usual. Detectives were concerned that he might need medical attention. Meanwhile, his 14-year-old daughter, Cinnamon, was missing until the next morning. The same officer returned to the house to search for her more carefully and discovered her lying in the doghouse. Cinnamon was curled up in a fetal position, trembling. She seemed to be in distress and had difficulty getting out of the doghouse. She was covered in bloody vomit and held a note in her hand, asking for forgiveness for what she had done. When she was taken to the police station for questioning, it was clear she was suffering significantly from stress, prompting them to send her to the hospital, where she lost consciousness. The cause of her deteriorating state was unclear, so a toxicology test was conducted. It revealed the presence of opioid painkillers. According to the doctor, the bloody vomiting was a lifesaver, as it led to the expulsion of most of the pills from her system. Cinnamon was saved, and after she regained consciousness, she was taken back to the police station, where she confessed to the murder. Authorities determined she would be tried as a juvenile delinquent since she was under the age of 16. Cinnamon initially confessed to the crime, explaining that she often argued with Linda and had found a weapon in David's office, which she had used. In August 1985, her trial began in California for minors. Seeking the best defense, David hired a skilled lawyer for Cinnamon. However, her testimony changed. She no longer admitted guilt and instead claimed insanity. The defense aimed to prove she was mentally incompetent at the time of the crime, presenting photographs of her discovery as evidence. Cinnamon's disbelief that Linda had died supported this defense. She outright denied the fact. Although she had no diagnosis of a mental illness, her lawyer suggested that the use of banned substances had impaired her perception, hoping to lessen her sentence. When questioned, David spoke at length about his health issues and how his family, including his mother and wives, had negatively impacted his life, which reflects his self-centered nature. In contrast, his former wives portrayed him as manipulative and domineering. Some even believed he may have conspired against Linda, but there was no evidence to support these claims. He promised Cinnamon that she would only undergo short treatment in a clinic after the incident and would be released, but he was mistaken. On September 13, 1985, Cinnamon was sentenced to 27 years in prison, having faced the possibility of life imprisonment, but her lawyer secured a reduced sentence. David did not attend the courtroom when the verdict was announced, fearing it might harm his health. His wife, Linda, passed away at the age of 23 and was cremated. Shortly before her murder, David had taken out life insurance policies on her, which paid out around $835,000. 6 months later, he purchased a luxurious mansion for $330,000, moved in his parents, bought several expensive cars, and lived a life of luxury. His mistress, Patty, and his baby, Crystal, also lived with him. David's mother, Manuela, was puzzled for a long time about why Patty continued to live with him after everything that had happened. Her son either ignored her concerns or told her not to interfere. Finally, Manuela realized that David's concern for Patty was more serious than just helping to take care of her, especially as they began sharing a bedroom. Rumors of their inappropriate relationship circulated throughout the city. From the start, the investigator assigned to Cinnamon's case had doubts about David's behavior. He was disturbed by David's actions, which did not reflect those of a grieving husband or a father mourning the loss of his daughter. Even during court proceedings, David sat behind his first wife, Brenda, who was worried about their daughter, and behaved disruptively, pulling her hair and drawing attention to himself, irritating others. David's actions raised suspicions, especially after he received insurance money for Linda and started buying expensive items. It seemed like his love for Cinnamon had vanished. His daughter was unaware of his luxurious lifestyle and didn't know where he was. Unlike Brenda, who consistently attended all the hearings, David only visited Cinnamon in prison occasionally. He discouraged her from participating in any rehabilitation programs that could have shortened her sentence. David assured Cinnamon that her youth would protect her from facing prison time, downplaying any fears she might have had. However, he was worried that the police would discover his role in the crime. In 1986, a detective uncovered that David and Patty had secretly married in Las Vegas, a fact David kept hidden from his parents. Patty became pregnant, and in September of that year, their daughter Heather was born. David refused to be listed as the father on the birth certificate and instead made up a story about a brief affair with a man who disappeared. David portrayed himself as a caring individual who decided to raise the child at home after the incident. More than 3 years later, Cinnamon found out about the insurance money her father received and the house he bought. She felt outraged that Patty, who was part of the conspiracy, continued to live in comfort while she was in prison, which she saw as unfair. The detective chose to speak with Cinnamon, who eventually revealed the conspiracy her father had planned. To confirm her claims, something concrete was necessary. Although she was scared, she agreed to use a wiretap. During a meeting on August 13, 1988, David showed up, and the goal was to steer the conversation toward her involvement in the crime. From the beginning, he kept insisting that Linda and her brother were plotting to kill him and that he had no other option. Cinnamon recounted some troubling incidents, such as the pills her father, David, had given her the night before the murder, which he said were meant to make her forget the attack. Her father then promised to hire the best lawyer to get her out of jail. David was willing to sacrifice another innocent person to save himself and promised to bring someone to the next meeting. Detectives prepared for this event, and Cinnamon wore a wiretap again. They provided her with specific instructions on what to say and ask. At first, David and Patty attempted to convince her that she had no memory of that night, but as the discussion progressed, several incriminating details surfaced, indicating that all three were involved in Linda's murder. 3 weeks later, the police arrived at David's house and arrested him and his new wife, Patty. From the outset, David denied everything and tried to blame Patty. When shown the recordings of his conversation with Cinnamon, he repeatedly changed his story, ultimately claiming that the discussion about Linda's murder was just a joke and that he was shocked that Cinnamon and Patty had planned it. He denied having done anything wrong. In September 1988, David was charged with murder. Cinnamon testified against him, revealing that he had woken her in the middle of the night and forced her to attack Linda. Prior to this, he had made her take pills and write a fake suicide note to make it seem like she had ended her life, convincing her that it would lessen her punishment. She narrowly escaped death from an overdose after vomiting. After the incident, David left the house and went to a nearby store, ensuring that the clerk saw him to create an alibi. He later explained to the police that he left because of ongoing arguments between Linda and Cinnamon. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found David guilty. He faced the death penalty but was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Patty, who was only 17 at the time of the murder, was also charged. She cooperated with the police, agreed to testify against David, and pleaded guilty to complicity. She claimed that David had tricked her into participating in Linda's murder by asserting it was essential for their happiness. She received a 3-year prison sentence. Even while awaiting trial, David continued his manipulative behavior. He approached another prisoner and offered $500,000 to kill the prosecutor and investigators on his case. However, the prisoner reported this to the police after being released. His cellmate agreed to help detectives by pretending to work with David to gather more evidence against him. Interestingly, David attempted to use his brother, Tom Brown, as a go-between for making the payment, with malicious intentions. When Tom learned of David's plans, he sadly declared that he no longer considered David a brother. For attempting to arrange these murders, David received an additional 6-year prison sentence. Cinnamon, who survived her father's betrayal, received a higher education while in prison and worked throughout her time behind bars. Her sentence was revised, and after serving 8 years with exemplary behavior, she was released in 1992 at the age of 21. In 1994, she got married, and a year later, her probation ended. She avoided communication and interviews about the incident but expressed deep regret for having allowed herself to be deceived and for becoming part of a conspiracy with fatal consequences. For some time, Cinnamon and Patty lived side by side and even communicated. David wrote to both, claiming he loved them, but no one believed him, and he never received a response. Later, Patty fought for custody of her daughter and won. She also started a family and, after 1994, tried to restore her relationship with Cinnamon, but Cinnamon refused. To manage his business, David hired a team of specialists, and it worked, as he profited from the company's activities during this time. In 2014, 61-year-old David Brown died in prison of natural causes.